Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming to the September meeting of the Toronto Police Services Board. I apologize for the half-hour delay. We had some unexpected additional items to deal with in the earlier meeting. So I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask my colleagues if there are any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflicts of Interest Act. None, none, none. Thank you. I'd like to start, before we really start the meeting, paying tribute to two extraordinary individuals who have served the City of Toronto with great dedication and whose meeting, this is their last board meeting. First of all, I would like to take the opportunity to congratulate and to thank Deputy Chief Mike Federico, as this is his last board meeting, and recognize his incredible service and achievement over an extraordinary 45-year career with the Toronto Police Service. Deputy Federico's career has been diverse and remarkable in so many ways. He is currently in charge of Community Safety Command, which comprises three core functions: Area Field Command, Central Field Command, and Divisional Policing Support Unit. But he's particularly recognized for his commitment to always working with the community and his dedication as a lifelong learner. Deputy Federico represented the Toronto Police Service and has on many occasions, locally, provincially, and nationally, on numerous provincial and federal committees working to improve public safety. As many of you know, Deputy Federico has a particular focus on the area of mental health, which is an issue of huge priority for the service and the board. In fact, Deputy Federico has become a somewhat renowned and extremely respected expert in this critical field. His work in this area has been consistently inclusive, working with the community to ensure the hugely important partnerships between the police and the public. The board is absolutely grateful to Deputy Federico for his critical role in working on the board's mental health subcommittee since its inception in 2009. And he's brought a wealth of outstanding judgment, knowledge, and a considered approach to a number of very important issues over the years, and been instrumental in bring about significant change in mental health training in the MCIT program, amongst other initiatives. Throughout his career, Deputy Chief Federico has embodied what the Toronto Police Service stands for, and its founding principles and its ever-important core values. And as many have remarked, I think it's going to be difficult, Mike, to imagine the service without you going forward. But be assured that Mike Federico is one of those police officers who really, truly cares about the service to the city. We heard it, Mike, in your interview on Metro Morning a couple of days ago, that extraordinary sense of service and contribution, but cares about policing in Toronto and the excellence of policing in Toronto. So be assured that when Mike leaves, his legacy certainly will remain in so many varied parts of this organization. His focus on making sure that we have the right systems and approaches, the right governance, and the partnerships that are important to making sure we have excellence in policing. So, Deputy Federico, Mike, on behalf of the board, we want to wish you just a great, healthy, happy, prosperous retirement to you, and Debbie, and the family. And we want to thank you for such incredible leadership, vision, and guidance over a huge number of years. And thank you for your great contribution. We also have another person who's going to have the last final meeting of the Toronto Police Services Board. And I want to thank her, Dr. Dunn Nuria, because this is her last meeting today. And Dr. Nuria, who was appointed by the province in December 2010, has an extraordinary, impressive career in the medical field and a renowned commitment to community. She's made an invaluable contribution to this board. She's been an active and tireless member, committing hundreds and hundreds of hours, not only to the board meetings, but to the committee meetings, and particularly in the area of mental health, where we've worked a great deal together. Throughout her time here, Dr. Nuria has always brought a perceptive and a compassionate lens to issues and challenges that we face. She's asked the important questions that need to be raised, again, particularly around the area of mental health, and working on the groups there and talking about the importance of our members suffering from PTSD and the assistance and support that is vital to the modernization of the Toronto Police Service. Her decisions are always based on principles and on thoughtful, informed analysis. So, Dr. Nuria, we are also going to miss you greatly. I've tremendously enjoyed working with you. I was appointed after you in 2011, but we've worked together now for 6 years. And it's, I know your extraordinary commitment and passion to this. So I want to thank you on behalf of your colleagues in the City of Toronto for all you've done for the Toronto Police Services Board, and wish you every success going forward. And Mayor Tory?
Well, I have here, Mr. Chair, a small token of the appreciation of City Council and myself as the Mayor, which really says many of the same things that the Chair just so eloquently said. I'll note it's dated on May the 23rd, 2017, because we had thought that would be the time of your last meeting, but I guess the appointments process sort of intervened, and we got the benefit of having you here with us for another few months. But I just want to say, as the Chair said, thank you for the many contributions you make to the community in your professional life as well, but you made a contribution here to the community through helping with policing, and I think the board and the police service are the better for your service. And as I said to you earlier today, your interventions are perhaps less frequent than some of the rest of us who are in public life, which is a lesson for us, but they were always very meaningful and very thoughtful, and we appreciate that very much, and I'll just give you that as a small token of our appreciation. Thanks.
You may.
I see that Deputy Frederico just said it was a privilege, but I'm going to say more than that, if I may.
You may.
So what I'd like to basically say is that serving on the Toronto Police Services Board has been a very distinct honor and privilege for me, particularly as the role of governance involves ensuring the safety of the citizens of Toronto. To the extraordinary men in blue, men and women in blue, you not only serve and protect us, but are even willing to lay down your lives in the line of duty. Now, I remember very vividly, within days of being appointed to this board, it was a wintry day, and a day with Sergeant Ryan Russell, a 35-year-old father of a 2-year-old son, was one such hero. Now, ladies and gentlemen, and the men and women in blue, you would remember that Sergeant Ryan Russell was struck down by a stolen snowplow in January of 2011, and that was just a few weeks after my appointment. He had laid down his life to serve and protect us. This tragic memory of a police hero still lives with me and is forever etched in my mind. Now, Chief Saunders, you are right here, and I think no one has a more difficult job than you in this place. Not only do you serve and protect us, but during your tenure, we have undergone the largest transformation in the history of Toronto Police Service. Chief, you have taken on this challenge and have personally gone out to all the units. You've tried to talk to your unit members, allay their fears, and to personally hear out their concerns and begin implementation. And we have heard from February, we've heard it in May, we've heard it very recently, the progress that's made, and this is certainly not an easy task, and we thank you, Chief. To my colleagues on the board, under the leadership of Chair Pringle, have gone where no police board has dared to go before, with bold and innovative path to excellence. 32 recommendations to modernize the service, all within well-defined timelines and outcomes. We have already seen some of the early successes, Mr. Chair, and marching forward to modernize the service. So congratulations to Chair Pringle, Chief Saunders, and the TTF team. Now the board staff, we wouldn't be able to do anything without them. So to the board staff, you're superb, professional, helpful, efficient, and are ready to provide institutional memory to all the new members as they come along. So thank you very much. Thank you, Joanne, Sandy, Ethelyn, Sherry, and Deirdre, who is not here, but has served many years on the service. So, and she's enjoying her much-earned retirement. Carl, who sits in front of me, thank you very much for providing legal advice and framework within which we could perform our duties. Thank you, Carl. Now, to members of the public who come here month after month to advocate on behalf of people or a special cause, please note that you are also appreciated for your dedication and giving your voice.
There's a woman downstairs that's trying to get in,
Okay.
assaulted by a police officer, and she's trying to get Andy Pringle to go downstairs and speak to her because she's being prevented from coming into this meeting. A black woman who represents community is being downstairs detained and can't come into this meeting, has called up here repeatedly for Mr. Pringle to come downstairs, and yet she's being prevented from coming into this meeting, this public meeting in this city-owned building. Why is that happening? If you appreciate the community members so much.
Let me just address the. Let me just address the issue of public safety. May I speak, please? We've heard from you. Let me just address the issue of the security downstairs. We are all aware of the need for increased security in institutions around the world. We hear time and again of threats and terrorist threats. No one is permitted from coming in. No one is permitted from coming into this building to attend, but it is the responsibility of the Chief of Police to ensure public safety. And so people are wanted as they are going into courthouses, and I suggest that this is something that is coming in areas right across the area of public service. Again, there is no impediment to access. There is merely a requirement to make sure that people, that the chief guarantee the public safety is maintained. So thank you for that input. I'm sorry, Dr. Noria, you've been here. Sorry, Councillor Lee, you had something you wish to say?
Can I just finish?
Yeah, sorry.
So I want to again thank you for giving your voice to a fellow man and those less fortunate. That was the point I was trying to make. So lastly, to my colleagues on the board, I have learned a lot from you and enjoyed my time on the board. And one thing I must say, and it's for all, that the current board under Andy, John, Shelley, Marie, Ken, and Chin have focused on what's the right thing to do and not what's the popular thing to do. And Mr. Mayor, I know that you talk about this a lot, and I'm personally carrying on this as a mantra in my life. So thank you very much, and thank you to one and all.
Thank you, Dr. Nuria. Councillor Lee?
I'm going to raise a point of privilege, and I was just downstairs, and is it possible to, because Ms. Renee is supposed to be deputating here, is it possible to expedite that, allow her to come up here to deputate? I'm requesting the chief to...
That's not cool. She needs to be here.
That's what I'm saying, expedite. Expedite her bringing up here. That's what I'm saying. Expedite her coming up here. That's why I'm asking for it. I don't know what you're... It's not cool.
I know. Okay.
Right, but what's he going on about? So, just a request.
She's in a danger.
He's on your side. Why don't we have the conversation? Yes.
Thank you.
Chief Saunders?
I'm on your side.
Thank you.
I'm not disallowing anyone to come to headquarters. Everybody is invited to headquarters. In order to come into headquarters, there are some rules that have to be complied with. We've spoken on the national security piece over and over again. This is nothing new. I don't know why people are surprised that places are being screened more scrupulously. People need to understand that law enforcement is a target when it comes to national security. As chief of police, I take that seriously. This building is a police building, and as such, we want people to come in. However, there are certain procedures that have to take place in order for people to come in. So it's not denying access. If the language here is that we're denying access, we are not denying access in any way, shape, or form.
I would also point out that this is the third or fourth month, Chief Saunders, that those have been in place.
Yes, it is, and it's also to be aware, the person we're talking about came through last month.
Councillor Lee, I may just turn this over to you. If she wants to speak with me, I'm happy to go down and talk to her. If you want to take over the chair.
I'll take over here.
Thank you.
Again, thank you, Ms. Pringle. Okay, I'm going to go back and go through the points. Number 3, I'm going to hold it for presentation. Okay, number 3 is a motion. All right, confirmation of minutes. Do I get a motion to move? Yes. Dr. Neria and Ms. Morena. All those in favor? Any opposed? Oh. Okay. There is also an amendment to number 3 as well. Confirmation of minutes from the meeting that was held on August 24th, 2017. Motion that the board amend minute number P19-5/17, request for special fund beyond the blue Toronto chapter to indicate that this report was referred to the chief rather than deferred. Move the motion, Mayor Tory, seconder, Ms. Molina. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Number 4, hold for deputation. Number 5 to number 5.1 to 5.8. Okay, we got a hold for deputation for 5. Yeah, 5.1. Yeah, all of 5 until the, and then we go through it later. Item 6, deputation as well, so I'll hold that. Number 7, respond to a jury recommendation from the coroner's inquest in the death of Mr. David Andrew Dosset, hold for deputation. Number 8, special constable appointment, UC of Toronto. Do I get a Mr. Mayor, Dr. Noria, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Number 9, special constables, Toronto Community Housing Corporation, increase in approved strength. There's deputation, hold for that. Number 10, recommendations for payment of legal indemnification, case number 2089-17, hold for deputation. Number 11, Ergo Industries Seating Systems, vendor of record. Can I get, you can move it? Councillor Carroll, seconder, Dr. Noria, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Number 12, speed measuring devices, vendor of record. Any holds? If none, can somebody move it? Councillor Carroll, Mayor Tory, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Number 13, vendor of record for facial recognition system. Any holds? None. Can somebody move it, please? Marie Molina and Dr. Noria, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Number 16, no, coming back. I thought there were others as well. I don't see it there. So I got to go back to my agenda here, which was been updated just now. Number 14, that is our TPSB monthly statistical briefing. Yeah, I'm going to be holding for presentation. This is part of the way forward recommendation 17. So I'll read that later. So they hold for presentation. Number 15, business case for uniformed staff detective sergeant, sergeant detectives and civilian promotions. Okay. Well, by Councillor Carroll. Number 16, appointment of a special constable to relieve traffic congestion. There's a letter from Mayor Tory. I think we need to introduce it first, do we? Add it to agenda. Mayor Tory, any seconder for that? Dr. Noria, all those in favor, adding it? Any opposed? Seeing none, added.
We're just adding it to the agenda.
Adding it to agenda, not approving yet. I'll let Mayor Tory do the speaking later on. So we hold for the Mayor Tory. So now we go back to the hall items. Okay, we're going to do number 14 first. She's telling what to do, all right? Thanks, Colleen. So we will do for the first time TPSB monthly statistical briefing. So can I have staff come up and now before we do that, this is part of the way forward recommendation 17. It's a monthly statistical briefing and is intended to contribute to improving the public understanding of policing, improve transparency, and enhance confidence through the sharing of public safety information. Within this briefing is a city-wide overview of statistical indicators, year-over-year comparisons, and most recent monthly geographical mapping of mental health-related calls for service, mental health apprehensions, violent crimes, traffic tickets, collisions, and fatalities, and administrative information. This has been vetted through almost a whole year of making sure that this is the kind of data that I believe the public will want ongoing. So this is the first of continuous monthly updates. So take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Ian Williams. I'm the Manager of Business Intelligence Analytics, and today we're delivering this presentation as part of the Way Forward. As Councillor Lee mentioned, this is part of our modernization plan. And for recommendation number 17, this is a key piece of delivering increasingly accessible and transparent information to the public. The purpose of which is increasing or enhancing the understanding of policing in Toronto and to increase transparency within that. The Toronto Police Service is a data-driven organization, and as such, the information that we're presenting today is part of what our organization uses on an ongoing basis to evaluate programs and to enable decision-making across the entire organization. So this briefing is a key piece of our information management strategy moving forward to provide accurate and timely information to the public as well as members of the Toronto Police Service so that we're able to make decisions and discuss public safety related challenges in Toronto using the same information on the same platform, effectively giving us the same forum to discuss these major challenges. And so today, as well as for each monthly meeting moving forward, the business intelligence team will provide this briefing, either myself or another member of the team, to deliver those statistical indicators, trends, and geographic patterns across the city for public safety topics, including calls for service, mental health, administration, and traffic safety related topics. So on Friday of last week, the Police Services Board released this as a news issue, and the Toronto Police Service provided it today as a news release, which was issued to give the public access to the online version of this presentation. So it is up and available currently in exactly the same format that you're looking today. This is literally, I accessed this from our public safety data portal, which is a piece of recommendation 17, as well as some of our key information tools such as the community asset portal that speak to our ability to deliver more timely and accurate information to the public. And so moving forward with the presentation, we'll begin by discussing a number of key items which move from month to month. So what we'll be presenting is a year to date to the end of August. So as we're discussing these items, keep in mind that this every month will be a year to date presentation of these topics. And what we've included here, in addition to the data, the trends, and spatial patterns, on either side of this sheet, you'll see a number of definitions of the terms that we're providing. And this is increasingly important for us to enable a conversation at the same table discussing the same topics. So some of these are very operational terms that you'll notice, some acronyms, which we subsequently describe not only in the columns here on each page, but in a glossary at the end so that we are literally talking about the same topics. And so what we have on our first slide are calls for service, looking at a year-over-year trend from 2015 to 2016 to 2017, year to date. And for both emergency and non-emergency calls, there's been very little change compared especially to this time last year. So a small increase in emergency calls as well as a small decrease in non-emergency calls, resulting ultimately in very little change compared to this time last year. So we see relative to that, the time that officers have spent on those calls is relatively equal to where it was this time last year as well. Into the middle of this slide, we see tickets, which are presented in two data sets. So one being warnings that have been issued related to traffic infractions, as well as the issued tickets, often which involve fines as well. So our warnings have decreased year over year compared to 2016 by about 22%. And we've had a decrease in tickets issued by approximately 1%. So relatively equal to where we were last year. In terms of arrests, 2016 compared to 2017 is relatively equal as well. There's been about a 2% decrease for arrests related to the Criminal Code or Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, CDSA. So moving to our next slide, we also changed topics a little bit into the mental health area. And these are calls for service for which officers have been dispatched to year to date. Across those subject areas where members of the public have called to indicate a number of challenges that are within a mental health crisis category. So those calls have increased this year so far by about 5% compared to last year. And in all of our categories, aside from one, we've seen that increase consistently. And looking not only on a year-over-year basis, but also a month-by-month basis, we're seeing the volume of calls that the Toronto Police Service is receiving related to persons in a mental health crisis. It's increasing on an ongoing basis. And so far this year, it's only by about 5%, but over the past 3 years, we've seen that growing at about a rate of 10% per year. And that not only increases month over month, but also year over year. So we're seeing that trend increasing on an ongoing basis, representing a much higher volume of work for members of the Toronto Police Service in responding to this. We've translated that same data into a 1-month snapshot. So our map that you can see here is the spatial representation of just the month of August. So where there was approximately 2,500 calls for service related to mental health crisis where officers had attended, that averages roughly to 81 per day calls where officers are attending this type of event across the city. And now we can see spatially there's a large clustering downtown. So we see the core has a higher volume than elsewhere in the city, but it's thanks, Miguel. But we also see this trend following a spatial pattern throughout the city as well, which is quite evident here. So related, mental health apprehensions. So primarily Section 17 of the Mental Health Act, which defines a police officer's authority to apprehend someone who's a danger to themselves or others. Those have increased as well, about 5% compared to last year. And again, we're seeing this on a month over month as well as year over year basis. So again, representing that higher volume of demand. And we're going to move now to again, the spatial representation of this, but also the average per day. And this is incredibly interesting because for, I think, a lot of public view on this topic, where we just looked at the number of calls that officers have been dispatched to, about 81 per day, here we're seeing approximately 28 apprehensions per day, which says there's about 50 of these calls that officers attending that aren't resulting in an apprehension. So there's another resolution that's addressed through this. And there's a lot of work that the Toronto Police Service is doing with partners as well. We've got teams such as the Mobile Crisis Intervention Team, which specialize in this topic. So there's a lot of interesting discussion around the difference between those two numbers. However, we do see the spatial pattern is the same. So across the city, we see a high volume downtown of apprehensions as well, which is consistent with those calls, as well as spatial patterns throughout the city. So moving on to the discussion of violent crime related subjects, homicides in Toronto are down this year compared to last year, with about 18 fewer than there were this time, and that's across all categories. So we're seeing fewer homicides related to shootings, stabbings, and other categories. In terms of shootings, we're down this year in the volume of shootings as well as the number of shooting victims by approximately 8%. So we're seeing that in the shooting category as well as the homicide category. Spatial pattern across the city, we see a wide array of locations, however, clusterings in central east, the core, as well as northwest parts of the city. Related to that subject, which speaks to enforcement, investigation, and collection of evidence, firearm seizures have increased this year by about 15% compared to last year. That's largely in the long guns, so rifles and shotguns, as well as handgun categories. It's important to note that approximately 39%, or nearly 2 in 5 of every firearm that's seized are handguns. Stabbings in the city have also decreased this year compared to last year by about 2% in terms of the number of occurrences, as well as approximately 5% in terms of the number of victims. Looking at the relationship between victims and attackers in those stabbing-related occurrences. There's a number of categories that indicate the nature of those occurrences. Approximately 41%, the attacker and victim were not known to each other. 15% were domestic partner relative related. 22% were acquaintances. And 22% there wasn't enough information to make a determination as to the relationship between those individuals. The spatial pattern of stabbing occurrences across the city, again, this is the month of August, where we see clustering to some extent in the downtown core and sporadic elsewhere across the city. Moving on to the traffic topic. Total collisions this year is down compared to last year. There's a decrease of approximately 8% total collisions. And within that category, there's been a decrease also in property damage, collisions involving an injury, as well as fail to remain collisions. And we're seeing that as a very positive message that's come out of enhanced focus around traffic safety, Vision Zero, and partnerships that are existing between Toronto Police and the City of Toronto in that regard. I would also note there's a number of these slides that have information that today is available as open data or in public-facing dashboards or interactive tools on our public safety data portal. This is one of those slides that has a lot of information today that's available publicly. Traffic fatalities are down notably compared to this time last year, 39 year to date, which is approximately a 28% decrease compared to this time last year. Of note within the fatalities that have occurred so far this year, and this is consistent across many years over time, approximately 50%, often slightly more than 50%, involve persons who are 65 plus. And additionally, and related to that is the same category of individuals, those people are crossing mid-block. So there's not at an intersection, not where there's a crosswalk of any sort. So literally those intersections where it's a mid-block fatality of a pedestrian who's crossing, essentially jaywalking. The spatial pattern, it's a little bit hard to see on this, one, because there's only a few occurrences that took place in the month of August, but also because this topic tends not to have high clustering of occurrences throughout the city. So there aren't several particular intersections where there are fatalities because of collisions or pedestrians or cyclists, for example. So this is a topic that you need a lot of data, many years of data, to identify strategic trends where enforcement or awareness or changes to infrastructure around intersections can be made. And again, on that topic specifically is where the partnership between the Toronto Police and the City of Toronto related to Vision Zero is so critical. Moving more into administrative related information, this slide demonstrates number of SIU cases as well as internal and external complaints. So comparing 2017 to 2016, there's been a decrease in the number of SIU investigations. In our bottom left-hand chart, we see our internal complaints. You'll notice that in between June and July of this year, there's a notable increase. That was an internal policy decision that was made regarding the speed of our vehicles and flagging for a unit level investigation, which in this case is documented as an internal complaint pertaining to any vehicle that's traveled in excess of 150 kilometers an hour. So that results in an instant internal complaint where there's follow-up at the unit level to determine the reason for that speed. And so that spiked. We expect that will probably decrease to some extent and then continue at a flat line at some point. Our external complaints are, you'll notice they change month over month, so you're not going to see a trend in terms of any particular month being high compared to previous years. That's more of an administrative interchange between the Toronto Police Service and the OIPRD. So complaints that are received via the OIPRD and come to the Toronto Police Service. And we see that more as an administrative process where some months there'll be more submitted than others. And that this year compared to last year's year to date is virtually identical to where it was last year. Absenteeism, so again on the administration topic, we're noticing both uniform and civilian absenteeism trends are increasing year over year. And this has been a trend over the past 3 years. It's important to note that the absenteeism rate at the Toronto Police Service is low relative to a lot of other public sector comparable organizations. And we would see that federal public service broadly, as well as other city agencies. The Toronto Police Service is notably low compared to that. However, there is an increasing trend year over year. Summary statistics, so just looking broadly at a lot of the documented reports that are collected. So dispatch calls for service, general occurrences, arrests, tickets, and SIU cases. So we've provided that as an overall summary, really representing a volume of work. And that's our last slide in this case. One of the key messages that we really want to get across on this is we use this information on an ongoing basis to support the decisions of the organization. And we do that largely because you've noticed the format of many of these. There's a lot of mapping involved. There's a lot of trends. Where were we this period compared to last period? And we break that down internally to the units that are responsible geographically or administratively for particular topics. And this is largely done for 3 key purposes. One is to address the complex needs of a city like Toronto. The second is to focus on partnerships, because there's many challenges that you'll recognize that aren't the Toronto Police Services alone. And so recognizing that there are areas where we can embrace partnerships and use this information again to talk about common challenges, we do that. And of course, ultimately and geographically, I love mapping, so maps show up a lot. And we do that to be where the public needs us most. And presenting information in a spatial format, which most people can connect with to some extent, we find that to be a crucial decision-enabling support. And so we'll be presenting this, as we mentioned, on an ongoing basis. It's available publicly now and will continue to be available. And we're striving for a continuous improvement environment. So we're using this information on an ongoing basis and moving towards more real-time decision support using this. So we're very happy to have presented this, and we look forward to feedback as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Mr. Jeffers, yes. Go ahead.
Thank you for that report. Now, based on what you've rightly said, that you're embracing partnerships as, in terms of trying to rectify situations in policing and so forth. Is there a reason why race-based statistics are not part of this, where community groups especially can determine where there's great need, and also they can argue about for additional resources to deal with this in the interest of the safety of the city as well? Is there a reason for us not doing that?
So I'll put that squarely within the objective to continuously improve. And so what you'll see, although they're not here today, you will very shortly see those pertaining to the regulated interactions. Those will come in this same format. So we're providing those very publicly to the board and to public, and that will be open data as well. And that will include race-based statistics, absolutely. As well, we're in discussions, and I'll defer to Deputy Federico on this subject more specifically, but use of force as well.
Yeah, because supplementary to that, I'm just going to say that the whole question of race-based statistics, right? Where as you've pointed out, criminal activity may be down or violence may be down, but in some communities it may be up considerably.
And so, I would like to see us capture that, so that, you know, we can advise, you know, communities where there's a prevalence of, say, violence, and so that, and we can advise, you know, granting bodies to allocate appropriate resources to manage that.
Ms. Molyneux? Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Jeffers, the board of the day created the policy to not collect race-based data. So this is a new narrative, new dialogue, new time, and we are working on figuring out some sort of agreement to make you know, the appetite for information to the public is something that we are trying to increase. As you can see, the amount of portals that we have opened up, the amount of relationships we've had with City Hall in sharing of information, and its raw data, as well as the presentations that we have here. This is for the purpose of giving just a general overview, but people have the ability of extracting more. But that race component is something that we need to discuss to revisit the board policy, so that we can make those changes. So it's not because we're being resistant. I don't think we ever have been resistant, but we need that guidance in order to move to that level.
Go ahead now, Ms. Molyneux.
No, I thank you for that, Chief. I just think that, you know, I would like to pursue that, you know, as, you know, board meetings as they come up, because I think it's really important that we factor that into our report and statistics.
Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Bonner.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Williams. I'm a bit of a map geek, so I really share your excitement for the data, and especially presenting it in a map format. I think it just is so visible for those of us who are sighted. So a couple of things I'm thinking about, because it's the first time I've actually gone to the portal is right now, and I'm seeing that when you do that as a member of the public, you have some options, and perhaps this will tie to Mr. Jeffers' observations, perhaps others. I'm wondering if when you come back on a regular basis, because this will be part of a monthly presentation, you could start to show us how we can play with the data options that are available, and whether there are ways for the public to actually input data that would then allow us to see this is what the public are seeing, this is what the service is seeing. It won't necessarily tell a story, but it will start to create a dialogue around where people are starting to use the maps for their own community information purposes. And I'd like to hear, because I can't tell from looking at this, what you thought the that interface with the public, because you mentioned engagement, so I assume that that's part of it. Mike, what you saw, what you envision that kind of engagement being. And then I have one other question.
Okay. Yeah, I think we'd be happy to spend some more time with the open data portal. I think we'd be happy to demo it, give some insight as to what the public can use it for, as well as where it's going, because it's not in a final state. It will be subject to continuous improvement and change over time, so input from the public will be critical in that regard.
And that ties to my second question, which is something that you and I have discussed briefly offline, which is as this information, as we become better at sharing this information, this kind of information, all the information about what happens inside the police service, there will be questions that are asked. They might come from inside the police service. They probably will come from outside as people start to find it interesting to navigate. Were you thinking about a way of capturing that exchange between the questions that are asked by, for example, members of the public and the answers that you as experts might be able to provide?
I think today the service does a great job through social media, doing a lot of work in that regard. So there could be a mechanism there. I think we could also find potential other avenues to receive and respond to those questions. We'd have to take that away, though.
And I would point out, and Councillor Carroll would know, chairing the budget process, that we do have, I think, a a practice that we're putting in place of having all the questions that are asked about the budget, and Mr. Veniciano would know as well, answered. So perhaps there's some practice there that we could adopt as you start to get people engaged in this.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Ms. Molnar. Any further questions from any board members? Seeing no questions, before I ask for a motion to receive his report, I'd like to thank Mr. Williams for bringing this forward, and also invite the public to comment on the information that's provided for any continuous improvements, as Mr. Williams was saying. So if you go up there and take a look, much appreciated that for input from the public. So a motion to receive the report, Ms. Molnar, Councilor Carroll, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried.
Thank you.
Now we go to the health items and the deputations. The first health item is number 4, and marijuana arrests, and this was from a letter submitted by Mr. John Sewell. So deputation is from Mr. John Sewell, who is on the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition. Former Mayor Joe Sewell, you know the rules, so you got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to begin by saying I resented being searched in order to enter this building. I found it very demeaning, and I think it was demeaning to other people as well. And I think it does this board no service to institute that kind of a practice. And I hope you'll abandon it very, very quickly. I might say that my colleague, because I know him, I've seen him here many, many times, Carl Lagensfield, has refused to consent to the search and is not being allowed in. I think he's a deputant in one of the items. I think somebody should go down and escort him in. He's well known to this board, and this is craziness.
The board
so I'm
is
here
not
to formally talk about a report that was in the Toronto Star some months ago, indicating they've analyzed the data of the Toronto Police Service, but for the years before 2014, indicating that black people are arrested 3 times as more likely than white people for the simple possession of marijuana. All the data indicates that, in fact, blacks don't use marijuana any more frequently than whites do, so it's very clear that what's happening is we have black racism that's happening in the practice of the Toronto Police Service. And this is reprehensible. This is not the kind of conduct that we want to see any public service providing. And there's no reason for thinking that what happened before 2014 is not happening today. We suspect it is. All the data has indicated that this kind of black racism has been taking place, and we have to find a way to stop it. We know that the board has all sorts of policies about racial discrimination, and that's terrific. But what we're talking about here is practice. How do we get the police to stop discriminating against blacks? And I think that, in fact, the board is going to have to take some action to ensure that this does not continue. It's going to be difficult to do it, but I think you have to do it. And I think you have to do it probably by starting and saying police officers are not going to be allowed to lay charges against people until that charge is justified by some person, such as a Crown Attorney or some independent person. So that you can actually start to say, if we're beginning to arrest too many people of a certain color, then we're going to stop it right away. But I think some kind of action must be set in place to stop this practice. I think it's reprehensible that because of the color of your skin, you're going to be treated differently by the police than other people for something very, very serious, a criminal charge, and perhaps being held without release. So it's very important that you put in place some structures to stop this occurring. It's not a policy, it's going to be a practice. And as I say, I think the only way to do it is to say police are not allowed to lay charges, individual officers, until that charge is justified by somebody else, some person who is a bit more independent. And that's the only way that I can see you stopping that kind of discrimination. And I'd ask the board to consider that kind of a policy and put it in place quickly so that we no longer have this reprehensible behavior. If this behavior happened in any other part of the civil service, people would be furious. And the fact that the police get away with it is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Any questions? Mayor Tory, I saw him putting up his hand first.
Well, Mr. Sewell, thank you. Could I just ask, are you aware, or whether anybody in your organization has done any research on whether there is any kind of a, I'll call it a fail-safe or something along the lines of what you suggested that's in place anywhere else? I mean, I haven't studied other sort of, I guess you want to call it legal and police systems to know whether the police in every case lay the charge or whether there's any kind of a, you know, any kind of a...
Well, I know that in 3 other provinces, Crown attorneys have to approve charges laid by the police. There's 2 experiments that are now happening in Ontario, one at 51 Division, where that is, there's a Crown lodged in 51 who's checking out those charges. So I think you can say that it is happening elsewhere. I might say that the impact of that is very, very substantial. The number of charges that actually are laid in places like Quebec, where they have this, are 22% less than Ontario. But in fact, the key is what happens to charges when they get to court. In Ontario, something like 44% of all the charges that are laid are withdrawn or dismissed by the court in Ontario, almost half. In Quebec, it's more in the order of 10 or 11%. So it's clear that some kind of monitoring like that can have a very, very strong impact. I don't know if in Quebec or British Columbia or New Brunswick, which are the other 3 provinces that actually have that kind of monitoring, that monitoring is done in order to ensure that there is no racial prejudice. I don't know whether that's occurring, but it's clear that it could be used in that fashion.
Well, thank you. Mr. Chair, I'll just mention I'm going to ask the Chief a question after about the 51 and about whether we know the results of these other provinces, because if we don't, it'd be useful to get that information for the board.
I think Mr. Jeffers put up his hand as well.
Mr. Sewell, you know, in view of what you've stated with the anti-black racism that you've acknowledged, and by the way, it's been acknowledged by the City of Toronto, anti-black racism exists, and the province through its anti-racism directorate. Now, what do you see as the role of the Ontario Human Rights Commission in protecting the rights of its citizens and being involved in this whole episode of selective racism?
I certainly think that they can play a very strong role, and you should involve them. But I guess what I'm worried about is that the board will take a position that says, let's get them in to study it and figure out what to do, which is going to take some years. And I think you want some action that can happen right away. So, but I certainly think the Ontario Human Rights Commission has a strong role to play, and they've been very outspoken on these kinds of questions in the past.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jeffers. Ms. Balmer, I thought that you had your hand up. No? Okay, Councilor Carroll.
So, let me understand. Have you've had only a quick look at how the other provinces do this? Are you not concerned that if we have that extra layer, and we're going to ask this question of the service as well, unless we put a Crown attorney in every division, would it not lead to more detaining while we have a Crown attorney make that determination?
No, you aren't determined. No, I don't think you detain somebody when they haven't had there's no charge laid against them.
Well,
I mean, and
what happens during the period where we're waiting to get the Crown attorney's opinion? I want to understand this, because if it helps, I want to understand how it would work.
So I guess there's 2 things. One, the Crown attorney is right there on site. That's one thing. Okay.
Okay.
The second thing is, if that's not an appropriate way of getting rid of racial determination, then I think you've got to start figuring out some other way of doing it.
Yeah.
But for too long is all we've had is a policy and haven't had the action. And so I'm just suggesting the kind of thing. I'm not responsible. I'm not a member of the Police Services Board. So, but in fact, you people are responsible for doing that, and this has been left too long. That's one possible way of doing it. I might also say we're dealing with something that is very minor. Possession of marijuana. I mean, you know, this is real. This is not significant. This is not murder or, you know, a crime of violence. So it's you know, so I think one has to be quite clear about that.
So, and one other question, and this is for the coalition, the whole coalition. One of the things that struck me about the article, and I thank you for bringing it, because I had missed this article when it appeared in the Star. It wasn't until you brought it to our attention. I don't know how I missed it when it was published, but be that as it may, now that we're looking at it, what struck me is that, you know, there was a struggle for the newspaper to really collate the data all along the line. Does the coalition advocate in terms of collecting race-based data? It's not just who do we stop today, but really all along the chain. You want to be you know,
I think so.
bail conditions, et cetera. You're in favor of race-based data all along the chain so that we can really follow not just who is stopped, who is considered for charges, but their path all the way along. How is it different? We would have to be recording it all the way along.
I think so, yes. I'm not quite sure how far you're going, but the answer at this point is yes. Until we actually have some kind of service where it's clear there is not continual racial discrimination, we have to start doing that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Question of staff, okay. Mayor Tory, go ahead. Oh, there's another deputy? Oh, sorry, yes, David Moran. And one more after that. Mr. Moran, you have 5 minutes, as usual.
Take notice that the Crown is the surety for Mr. Derek Moran, the person I have. And I just want to say, Councillor Lee, I wasn't heckling you back there. That was just my reaction to finding out it was Dion, because I know she's got a bad back. So,
okay.
I just want to start off by saying that by me speaking at this meeting is in no way my consent, express or implied, and doing so is fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. And if everything that you guys think is going on downstairs right now with these searches is okay, then why don't you get real police officers to do them? So I was just thinking about people who are most likely to be arrested for smoking or using or possession of marijuana. That they probably don't know about this, but this is from the Sal Haney's Police Manual of Arrest, Seizure, and Interrogation. This is page 117. I'm going to read from the chapter 23, or paragraph 23, consequences of an illegal arrest. An illegal or unlawful arrest by a police officer will constitute a defense to a charge of escaping from lawful custody, assaulting a peace officer in the execution of his or her duty, or obstructing or resisting a peace officer in the execution of his or her duty. The reason for this is that a person cannot be said to have escaped lawful custody unless the officer had lawful authority to place him or her in custody. Similarly, a person cannot be guilty of assaulting a police officer in the lawful execution of his or her duty if the arrest itself was unlawful. Before a person can be said to be obstructing a peace officer in the execution of his or her duty, it must be established by the officer that he or she was, in fact, acting under a duty. That's from Johansson, 1947, the Supreme Court of Canada. Similarly, a person cannot be convicted of resisting a peace officer in the execution of his or her duty unless the officer was acting directly within limits of their powers and duty. If the officer makes an unlawful arrest, then there is a common law right to resist that arrest. That's from Christie versus Lichinsky, 1947, somewhere from the UK. Now, I just want to make it clear, I'm not I'm not encouraging anybody to try this because it's probably just going to end up badly for you, you know, considering police have armed and deadly weapons on their hips and everything else. But I'm just pointing out that I'm not quite sure how anyone walking down the street, a police officer arresting them for smoking marijuana or having it on them, could ever possibly be a lawful arrest. Because as I kept on mentioning here, the word person, I don't think many people realize that, but once you sift through the obfuscation, the legalese use of the word include in the criminal code, the definition for person is actually Her Majesty and an organization. So hopefully the new 80 police officers that are hired will be taught how to differentiate between your fellow man, your fellow woman, and Her Majesty and an organization. Plus there's section 32.1 of the Constitution. Mentioned that last time I was here. Peter Hogg's clarification. I've spoken about that with Marco Mendicino, the MP from my area, who's the parliamentary secretary assistant for Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould. That acts and statutes, I know I hate to break this to a lot of people in this room, acts and statutes only apply to government employees. Those who are performing a public function of government, one who is a government actor, or those performing government actions. That's why Ontario is a common law jurisdiction where the rules of equity apply, and legal actually only applies to government employees. So I don't think any of these fine, upstanding common law peace officers ever join the force thinking, they join the force thinking, I want to help good people and protect them from bad people. Not by arresting their fellow man or woman for smoking a plant that grows out of the ground and being responsible partly for putting them in a cage for a commercial crime in which there's no harm done and there's no injured party. The very beginning of the Constitution, the very first line says, recognize the supremacy of God. And Genesis 9:3 says, I have given you all things, including the green herb. And Romans 2:11 says that God is no respecter of persons, because ultimately, when you break down this legalese gibberish, these acts and statutes always go back to person. And the definition of person is always either a corporation or Her Majesty in an organization, in the case of the City of Toronto, a municipality. So hopefully everyone knows, going here in the future, just, you know, comply with section 32.1 of the Constitution, because the rules are being strictly enforced now, right? Because I read that on the police board's website. Just strictly enforce section 32.1 of the Constitution, and this, you know, we'll all get along. And people will go back to, you know, having it out for the police like, you know, it's turned out to be, and things should be okay.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Any questions of Mr. Moran?
Oh, I do not consent to being referred to as Mr. Councillor Lee.
Okay.
I love you platonically, but no, Mr.
Okay, thank you very much. Next applicant is Jody Emery. Miss Emery, please. You have 5 minutes to
I'll start my timer.
tell us what you have in your mind.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak. And I just want to say those monthly statistical reports, that's incredible. If you haven't had that before, that was very insightful. And I'd like to see more about marijuana and drug arrests and having a breakdown too. I'm here to talk about the respect for the law. I have law enforcement family members. My sister worked as a first responder for 911 and is now Vancouver Police. I have RCMP in my family as well. And I respect the law when it's respectable. And for the vast majority of Canadians, marijuana law enforcement arrests are no longer respectable, and it brings distrust and disrespect towards our law enforcement officers by enforcing these laws. We know from the Toronto Star report, please do read it, that these arrests are racially biased. They target people of color, the poor, minorities, those who are already unfairly treated in our society. And Bill Blair, your former police chief, acknowledged this last year, saying one of the greatest injustices in our country is the racial disparity in the marijuana law enforcement. So right now, I think we can do a great service to our law enforcement and to society by trying to bring back respect towards law enforcement with respect to marijuana law enforcement. In various jurisdictions, including Seattle and a number of U.S. states, Washington, Colorado, California, Hawaii, Missouri, and Arkansas, they have something called lowest law enforcement priority. And this is a priority such that all law enforcement activities related to offenses other than cannabis offenses shall be a higher priority than all law enforcement activities related to cannabis offenses. We're hearing a lot about mental health and a lot about our first responders who are being traumatized and seeing statistics of more people jumping off buildings, horrible crimes, stabbings. That's what our law enforcement should be focusing on. That's what makes you heroes, when you deal with our society and treat people with respect. But when it comes to marijuana law enforcement, it's not respectable, and that's why the law is supposed to be changing. I was arrested for the first time ever myself in this city by the Toronto Police. I'm out on bail, but now a resident of your city as per my bail conditions, and I'm very happy to be a resident of Toronto. It's a beautiful city. It's a wonderful place. It's so diverse, and there's so much going on, but it makes me so sad to see raid after raid of dispensaries when alcohol dispensaries called restaurants and bars, they contribute to increases in violence and sexual assault and all sorts of violence on our streets that impact individuals and society at large. I know police dread the weekend because they're going to have to deal with a lot of drunken people causing harm to themselves and others. But they know, and it's a joke amongst everybody, that, oh, I hope I get a stoner. The most they're going to do harm to is a bag of Doritos. And in Seattle, the Toronto Police gave out bags of Doritos at Seattle Hemp Fest with a little notice saying, we're not going to arrest you, and it was wonderful to be on good terms with the police. And I want that. I want that for you so desperately. I'm tired of seeing this hate and anger towards law enforcement when we should be trying to build more respect. So when we talk about how much money is spent and time and resources on marijuana, it's not just the possession arrests, which are completely unjustified. It's not just the growers and the patients and the dispensaries. But why don't we consider, instead of your next dispensary raids, because they happen every week, what if you designated that money? It's tens of thousands of dollars per raid, but what if you announced to the public, in the interest of public safety and in our law enforcement officers, let's use this marijuana raid money for mental health initiatives for our frontline officers. Yeah! Why don't we give more money towards law enforcement who are dealing with actual crimes, with actual victims and real harm and real trauma, rather than forcing the police to have to go into dispensaries in Kensington Village and other places and to have to cower away with money and cannabis that is really should be benefiting society. So marijuana law enforcement does more harm than good. And in order to bring more respect towards law enforcement, the police board, please consider lowest law enforcement priority. It may not be something the board can do. It might be something the city needs to do, but you can announce that police will make sure that if there's anything else other than a cannabis crime to investigate, that's the priority. And I promise you it will bring more respect to police and a more willingness to engage if we can just pass the peace pipe, stop busting people, and focus on helping our law enforcement and citizens in society who struggle with much greater dangers such as alcohol and hard drugs and all sorts of things that officers see every day. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Amory. Any questions for Ms. Amory? If not, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
And point taken, and the laws are changing, but that doesn't mean that nobody can be busted for doing something illegal with marijuana, because there are limits to what has been put in place right now. You know, you can only go so much. You cannot smoke and drive. So things of that nature will still be enforced. Okay, we'll carry on with our agenda. And because of the deputy not being able to be here on number 5 and 6 yet, we will carry on with item number 7. Oh, okay, sorry, we're not finished yet. Thank you, Mayor Tory. Now we go to question of staff. Council Carroll, Mayor Tory first, sorry. Mayor
I
Tory?
just had the one question that I indicated I would ask of the chief or his designate with respect to, Mr. Sewell mentioned a pilot project in 51 Division where we have a crown signing off. I'm not sure how it works or what the purpose of it was. I don't know if I was here when it was instituted, but you know, is it, why was it done, and is it working, and is it achieving what it was intended to achieve?
Yes, it is working, and the reason why the crown is embedded is strictly for diversion purposes. As you saw when our analysts went up and spoke about the number of mental health occurrences that we have, a lot of those occurrences also involve certain threshold criminal behavior. And rather than put people that have mental health issues through the judicial system, that Crown has the ability of diverting them through other programs so that we get the best solutions rather than a traditional, you know, put them in the trial system. And that's working fantastically.
So if it was chosen to do so, would it be an insurmountable task to take a look at the issue that Mr. Sewell raised and the Star article raised, which would be just to look at generally at marijuana arrests in that one division on the same kind of trial basis or whatever it is you call it, to see if there's anything that could be done with regard to those kinds of arrests, or would you not think that's advisable?
Well, I can tell you right now, I think maybe I need to get the message out a little bit louder and clearer, and I think you've heard me, Mr. Mayor, speak on several occasions, and the fact that I do not encourage my men and women to be arresting people for straight possession of marijuana in light of what is going to be taking place in the future. The trafficking piece is another completely different discussion, which you've all heard, and I'm sure due to time I'm not going to go through that again. But I'm not the least bit interested in straight possession of marijuana charges. So I need to take a look at exactly what the numbers are and what we're doing and what I can do to stop that from happening.
Final question, Mr. Chair. Is it possible we could get here, just as part of this, and it may be, I don't think it's buried in any of the stats that we see, what the statistics are in the last period of time with respect to marijuana arrests generally, so that we would see whether there are as many happening at all. And then I don't know whether we have the ability, as the Star obviously did, to track whether the pattern, that, you know, and it is a disturbing pattern that is in their article, has continued, even with what I expect will be a reduced number of marijuana arrests. Can you provide that to us?
I will look into that, and definitely, you know, my primary goal is to find out the root cause. I do have concerns for this. I want to see what the cause may be, if I can determine that. Whether or not the training is translating to the frontline officers, whether or not there is proper and effective supervision so that we get it right, and then make those necessary changes.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. Councilor Carroll?
Well, I'm taken back even after hearing this. My knee-jerk reaction when this was on the agenda first, we had to postpone it, but it was on the agenda last time, was to say, let's hear the concerns, and we have the research from the Star, but we also know, they admit themselves in their piece, that there are some impediments because there are things we're not tracking, we should be tracking, and not the least of which is race-based tracking in terms of who gets detained, who has to await bail, all the rest. But also, is this symptomatic of something else? Is there do we also have a trend of under, you know, having detained you for some other reason, we're now throwing the book at you with whatever might stick, and you know, net widening in fact. So for us to come up with specific recommendations about how that would change is really policy on the fly. So I'm wondering, because we are concerned, we do acknowledge the problem that's been brought to our attention. I'm wondering if what we should simply do is refer this to the chief and his staff, asking them to report back, first commenting on their own comments on what it says in the Star, and proposing solutions, including commenting on the solutions suggested by the community and others that they may know of that would be effective in getting to the bottom of whether or not we have profiling that is defensible, if in fact that can ever be, But by allowing them first to report on this, their take on the article and review of solutions, I think we will be starting down a path that we need to, nevertheless, because I think with legalization is going to come a huge amount of misinformation and misunderstanding anyway, and we want people to know what is still applicable and what our approach will be. So I think starting this work is not opening up a can that isn't going to need to be opened up anyway, and urgently.
So while you're crafting your motion, can I get the chief to comment?
Yeah, anything that will enhance transparency and accountability, I agree with. I just want to make sure that the board understands that we stay in our lane. And when I say that, the report speaks of the judicial system. It speaks to bail. It speaks to incarceration and other factors as well, too. So in crafting whatever resolution or whatever you're going to be asking, I just request that it is put within the parameters of our responsibilities.
Thank you. And Councillor Carroll is going to be writing up something to refer to the chief for report back so that we can get it right. So while we're doing that, I will send this down and go on to the next item, unless anybody else wants to speak to this or ask questions. Or your new deputant? Actually, sorry, we made a rule, we did make a rule that deputants have to register. You have to register. Yeah.
All of you are smarter than I am, and I get this.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be smarter than all of us in this room. And you've been lobbied by Kim Terry, and you've been lobbied by Hill and Knowlton Solutions, and you know it. Yeah. On behalf of policy, it's not policy on the fly. It's pay for play. It's cash for access. And it's disappointing to watch you use the loyalty of your police force, and like Jody Emery said, force them to arrest people that they know deep down they don't want to be arrested. And they're the ones who have to.
Thank you.
So they're the ones who have to have neighborhoods stare at them.
Thank you.
None of you
Yeah.
do. John Tory.
I think we need to see, yeah. Thank you. Okay, we are skipping 5 and 6 right now. We come back to it later. Item number 7, we do have a deputy on it, the response on jury recommendation from the coroner's inquest into the death of Mr. and David Andrew.
Dion, yeah.
Deputation is by Miss Melissa Graham. Is Miss Melissa Graham here? Melissa Graham. Final call for Melissa Graham. So there is, Miss Graham is not here, so does anybody want to ask questions of staff? Does anybody want to speak? If not, can we have a motion to take staff recommendation? Mayor Tory, Dr. Noria, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. And then we have item, going on to item number 9. And that is Special Constables, Toronto Community Housing Corporation, increase in approved strength. Again, Ms. Graham. She showing up? No? If not, any questions of staff? Seeing none, I need a mover for the motion. Dr. Noria, Councillor Carroll, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Now we go to number 10. The deputant is still not here. Are we able to resolve it? 15. Okay, we have item number 15. Which is a Mayor Tory, no, sorry, item number 15 was approved. Number 16. Number 16, Mayor Tory, you want to?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. And I'll thank my colleagues for the indulgence of receiving this today. We have been exploring for some time the legal framework within which we could, as a city, employ on the streets of Toronto some people who were not police officers who could help us manage traffic and ensure pedestrian safety. And there was two motives behind this. Number one was to ensure safety for pedestrians and move traffic better, which is something that is probably, there's no issue brought to my attention more frequently than that. But the second was to try to find a way in which we could do this without deploying highly trained, expensive police officers, because they have other things to do, as has been discussed today. And we did a pilot project as a city at the city's expense, where we hired a number of paid duty police officers, so they were sworn police officers and therefore had the authority to direct traffic under the Highway Traffic Act, which only, with an exception I'll come to in a moment, only sworn police officers can do. And the pilot project was very successful in that it, in the intersections where we deployed the officers, there was a 90% reduction in the blockage of intersections by cars, and there was a 70% reduction in the blockage of intersections which puts pedestrians at safety by pedestrians. So we've decided to move ahead with deploying these non-police officer people across the city. And so we originally pursued a path of seeing if we could have an amendment made to the Highway Traffic Act itself to make allowance for this deployment of non-police personnel to manage traffic. And that had all of these sort of shortcomings that come with legislative amendments, simply that it takes time, and there's a lot of consideration that the government wants to put into looking at this. And in the midst of all of that, we sort of discovered, with the help of some people, I think, in the province, the fact that if this board, the Toronto Police Services Board, made a request to the province to permit the deployment of special constables, as we do parenthetically for the TTC and the Toronto Community Housing Corporation as two examples, that we could deploy those people in the manner that we had contemplated, which is that in this case they might be called special constables, they would be under the law, but we might call them something else, but their job would be to sort of manage pedestrian safety and traffic issues. And so the first step in the process of actually making this happen, and these ones would propose to be employed by the City of Toronto in the transportation services area, and would be given the responsibility of ensuring pedestrian safety and managing traffic, would be for this board to agree to write a letter to the Minister of Community Safety for the province of Ontario, asking them to indicate they would be willing to designate special constables to perform this role. And once that's done, then we would proceed to, as we're doing in any event, to design a program as to how many and how they'd be trained and so on. And then my guess is, and you can nod, Carol, if I'm right about this, it would end up probably coming back here in terms of the authorized number of those special constables, as it does for the TTC and for the Toronto Community Housing. But my objective certainly is to see these approved and deployed, approved in all respects, including by council to the extent there needs to be a budget approved, and on the streets by the early part of next year. And so that really was what lies behind my letter, which is I'll call it a formality that has to be followed in order to get the Minister of Community Safety to proceed to give authorization, which I am fairly confident from all of our discussions with the province they're going to do.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. Any questions of Mayor Tory? Before you, I do have a question. It doesn't say here, Special Constables is the organization that pays for those Special Constables. In this case, would the City of Toronto be paying for it?
Yes.
Okay.
The proposal is that it would be done pursuant to the Transportation Services Division of the City of Toronto. They would not be a part of the police service or paid for by the police service,
okay.
But they'd have to work obviously in close consultation with the police service. And I would say, as I said to the media this morning, it's likely they'd be trained by the Toronto Police Service too, because they have the existing expertise on managing traffic and ensuring pedestrian safety.
Chief?
Yes, when it comes to cost, the devil is in the details, as I'm sure everyone at the table here is aware of. And although I certainly encourage anything that's going to enhance the flow of traffic, when it comes to the compliance, when it comes to the training and the modernization piece of as new laws come in that would be specific to highway laws, that would be put upon the Toronto Police Service. And the one big factor is that special constables every 5 years have to go through a screening process, which is quite complex and consumes a lot of time. So I think we have to bear that in mind and set in place a mechanism that would absorb the cost rather than add to our present situation. So that's the only consideration that I'm asking for. I'm certainly willing to work on the MOU, which is mandatory in order to get the process worked out. So city lawyers, our lawyers would craft and design that, and then that would be a good starting point.
Thank you very much, Chief. Councillor Carroll, comment?
So we can sort these details out back at the ranch. But I'm seeing the synergy here because we're talking rights of way. Is it possible that if we do this, we're going to end up having some sort of dispatcher or supervisory unit, a management unit of some kind? And I think it is a real wave of the future thing to do. But I'm wondering if there's a synergy here such that we could come up with a unit that in fact helps us deal with our crossing guard proposal at the same time, since it would all come under Highway Traffic Act considerations, rights of way, etc., such that we really kill two transformational birds with one stone.
I guess that question is directed to me, Mr. Chair, and I'm certainly willing to look at that as a possible, because we have to deal with that issue as well, and we will consider them roughly at the same time anyway. So.
Excellent, excellent.
So legal.
Session that deals with, maybe the November meeting, but that deals with the crossing guards issue and the transfer to the city. So the opportunity will be coming up very soon.
Okay, because just this morning we found out that crossing guards is an issue. 22 officers in one division was employed as crossing guards. Anyways, great minds do think alike. I was thinking of the same thing, Councillor Carroll, that we should have a overall picture of how we're going to handle all this extra work that the city is taking on. So, and the authority is moving it. I'm Councillor Carroll seconding it. All those in favor? A recommendation? Oh, the motion, yes. The motion that Mayor Authority is moving is two parts. Yeah. Well, I can read it. The Toronto Police Services Board will be requesting special constables under the Police Services Act to be authorized to direct traffic under the Traffic Act. And two, the Toronto Police Services Board requests a letter from the province confirming that special constables appointed by the TPSB will be approved by the Minister of Community Safety and Correctional Services. So, all those in favor? Any opposed?
This won't affect me. We park legally for coffee
right.
in the suburbs.
Yep. Now, can we go back to item number 4, that Councillor Carroll was putting together a motion?
Yeah, it's the referral motion, which is simply, I don't know if they've even had a chance to type it up or wordsmith it for me. It's the referral motion simply to refer the correspondence in item number 4 to the chief so that he can, yes. What I'm trying to give effect here is to give the service a chance to review and comment on the STARS research, and then also to recommend possible improvements that we could make, including reporting on the improvements suggested by the community. Yeah, I don't know if we use the word deputant over here at police board, but if we do, that would be a, oh, actually, no, you could leave it as a plural instead of a possessive, because there were 3 deputants.
Any questions of the motion? Seeing none, I need a seconder. Oh, the chief wants to comment?
Considering this is going to involve 10 years worth of data, I'm asking for fair time to do the review so it can be thorough and fair.
I'm free.
Which is very fair, and we're in the middle of budget process, so I would say by the board meeting in the new year would be the best, because we've got a budget meeting, we've got a major report coming back. January makes it, you know, a 3-month turnaround.
Mayor Tory?
Could I just make a friendly suggestion, amendment on that, which maybe the chief would be amenable to, which is, with respect to your second sentence there, the chief's report should include a review of the deputy's proposed improvements. That really related more to the sort of marijuana law enforcement, and the chief made clear what he said to his men and women, but there were some suggestions made there about the Seattle model and the what else was said, there was another example. Oh, this business of the Crown having to sign off, which had a number of reasons. I just wondered if there was any chance of an interim report he might make on those if he thought, because otherwise we wait until January for that. But
comment by the chief? Oh, Ms. Muller?
I think the bigger picture issue is there's going to be a different framework for marijuana next year. So maybe we can keep that as our ultimate time frame, and by January bring forward one report, because frankly, speaking as a government employee, doing one report twice is twice as much work. So if there's no need to actually have the information for decision making before January, let's use January as perhaps the time we start to plan for the services work to implement the marijuana legislation. We can roll it into that. That's not part of your motion, but I would suggest we look at it that way.
Yeah, I can, you know, if we want to get this right, if I see something that is sensational, then I'll implement it.
Okay. Yes. All those in favor? Oh, sorry, I forgot to ask for a second. Mayor Tory seconded, I guess. Yeah, okay. I thought you were going to second it. Okay, done. I think I did skip item number 15 was because it was held by Councillor Carroll. Which is a business case for uniform staff, detective, sergeant, detective, and civilian promotions.
Oh, yes. Yes. I actually ended up finding a comment while in between then and now when I held it that sort of goes there. The promotions here, they've been acting for some time, but really some of them have been acting for multiple years. It's not just acting for the last few months. There are positions in here where they've been acting for multiple years. Am I correct? Correct. So in terms of them, we've heard, you know, there's been some media spin, okay, so you got 80 officers, now here's 30, and how many retired? But in fact, these acting positions date well before we had more retirements this year than forecast. So you can't really do that math. Am I right?
That's correct.
Okay, I wanted to highlight that and be sure that I was correct about that. Thank you. That being said, I can move the recommendations. Having read all the descriptions, they're all critical functions.
Seconder, Dr. Noria. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. And may I pass the chair back to the chair? Except for the deputy leader, Dion. Okay.
So, thank you, Councillor Lee. So, item number 5 is, and there's a deputation from Dion Renee, and Dion, I'd ask you to, if you're ready, to come on up and propose. Item number 5 is, this is the consent agenda. So, Dion, is it everything on the consent agenda that you wish to address, or is it one or two items?
I'm not sure if you've identified to this board what happened to me coming here today, Chair Pringle, because I'm sure they're wondering why I'm bruised, have a bloodied mouth, have bruises on my wrist, my knees, and my neck, and why it's taken me so long to get to this hearing. So I'm not sure.
I have
because
not.
I have had tears in front of my face. I didn't expect to come here today like this. And ironically, the issues on the agenda have that I came here to depute on behalf of the public now has caused me to choose in the near future to make a complaint, and I will probably be one of these people on this list for the injuries that I've sustained by a Toronto police officer today. I originally came here on behalf of community to speak to these issues and how can you have on a consent agenda, which is usually something that's just easily passed, common, regular things that happen, that you can see injuries as being injuries and death as being something that ordinarily happens, and you just consent to the agenda without any kind of additional scrutiny. As far as I know, for any agendas, consent agendas are really just things that can be easily passed. Okay, we're going to meet on Tuesday and things like that. That's nothing controversial. I come in today to this to give a deputation, and yet I'm assaulted by a police officer. How is that possible? Now I have injuries as a result of a police officer. How is that possible? Now I have to make a claim against Toronto Police for coming to a public meeting. How is that possible? So my question is, how do you go ahead and allow things on a such things as injuries by police, death by police, and put that on a consent agenda? That ultimately was my concern when I saw this agenda, because I said, this doesn't make any sense. And when the public is, and especially with the history of policing in the more recent days, dealing with the issue of Defante Miller and what occurred with him, and there was no appropriate follow-up, and all the assessments that should have taken place, or the protocols that were supposed to be followed, that they were not followed. Today, when I took issue with what was going on, and that is the breach of people's charter rights, Section 7 and 8 of the Charter, to be arbitrarily detained, to have a warrantless search, all of which is not lawful under the law, all of which are a breach of the Charter. When I raised those issues, and I came in, and I asked to speak at the front desk, and when somebody refuses me, when you ask for to speak to a superintendent, if they can't address an issue, because all I wanted to do was come upstairs. When that is done, and a supervisor is not given, then the protocol hasn't been followed. So it's this idea that how do we know under these reports whether or not the protocol was followed as to these injuries that are now just willy-nilly being consented to and pushed aside?
Dion, if I may just answer that. The attempt is that these are items which we see every month, as opposed to items which are unique to a given meeting. And the board members have had a chance to review them. They can pick any number of items on that they wish to question. So perhaps consent items is a misnomer, but it is in no sense minimizing it. It is the regularity with which we see those items at the meetings. Second of all, the discussion that we have had for the last hour and a bit downstairs, I told you that I would bring it up with my colleagues under other business. So, you know, you're making a good point that the items on the consent agenda are not trivial, and we're not trying to trivialize them, but we see these issues, we see these complaints, we see these oversight responsibilities come to us at every meeting, unlike the marijuana arrest, or unlike the things that are special to this meeting. So it was an attempt to say, board members, you've had this for a week. If there's anything you want to question, it's there for you, so we're not minimizing it. But that's in effect how we're trying to deal with it. So you make a very good point. But thank you for doing that. And the one that has to do with access, I promised you when we sat downstairs that we would bring it up under other business, and I will let you comment on it at that time.
I wasn't sure that my 5 minutes was up. I think the greatest concern...
It's not. You actually have a minute and a half left.
Right. Thank you. And I do thank Councillor Chin for coming up and raising the issues. I was told that you did do so thank you. The point that I wanted to finish on is the very point that you just made, saying these are things that regularly come up. These are fundamental issues. If civilians have injuries as a result of police officers, if civilians die as a result of interaction with the police, these are fundamental issues. How can they be seen as ordinary? If this board sees it as ordinary, then this board has a problem with its ability to be oversight, because it should not be ordinary. It should be stopped. It should be controlled, mitigated, whatever the issues are. They need to be addressed. It shouldn't just become ordinary.
I didn't say ordinary. I said, unfortunately, we see them regularly. But your point
it
is
should
well.
not be something that is just regular or seen as such. You should be shocked every time. Every time.
Thank you,
when
Leon.
I get to speak later, I hope this board doesn't. I mean, I feel so weird sitting here knowing what just happened to me, knowing that I'm in pain, knowing that I need to go to the hospital, but yet still wanting to advocate on people, because it really is a matter of life and death. And yes, my wellness is challenged as a result of me staying here in order to speak for those who are not able to speak here because of the impediment. There are people outside not wanting to consent to this arbitrary detainment and search and warrantless search going on. They didn't come in. My life has been challenged today for me standing up for what is correct under the charter. And that shouldn't be. I shouldn't have to be sacrificing my life, yet people sacrifice their lives every day. And these issues on here, we don't know the substance or the substantive issues. Perhaps you've reviewed it, but the point is this is a public meeting. When the public is looking at it, we want to have an understanding of what's going on as well.
Thank you. Any questions, colleagues, of Ms. Renee?
Mr. Pringle, I'm not one of your colleagues, I'm just an acquaintance, but I would like to know exactly what happened between on.
Thank you, Brenda. We will get to that in a minute. Thank you. Anything else, colleagues? Okay. Yes, do you have a question?
No, I don't have a question from the definite. I'm just wondering what the next steps are when you say anything else, what are we doing now?
Yes.
I did, in fact, have questions on the inquest and the recommendations on Mr. Doucette. I don't think any of us saw that one as something we would be discussing today.
Right.
Where are we in the agenda, and when do we actually get to discuss Mr. Doucette?
So I assume that we've gone through, and as we've done in past meetings, because the consent agenda, in the way it's been phrased, has been here for the last 4 or 5 meetings, that as we have done in the past, that anybody who wants to hold an item for discussion does so. You have held several in the past. I take it there's one you want to hold now for discussion.
Okay, so I'm not 100% clear. As we were going through the agenda earlier, we were holding almost every item in the agenda that Ms. Renee was scheduled to speak on. If we were not on the item of Mr. Doucette, then if we didn't hold it out of our confusion, we certainly should have. And if we have voted on it, we should reopen it, because there are questions raised by the service of us that we need to discuss. Sure. But I think the meeting began with a certain amount of difficulty and distraction, and we need to get now down to the recommendations coming out of the loss of life of Mr. Doucette.
Mayor Tory?
Well, I would just point out, Mr. Chair, that just in deference to the Vice Chair, we did go through, and specifically when Ms. Graham was not here, the matter was called for a question. So he just conducted the meeting as you normally would. And so
right. If I was confused, I apologize. Yeah, but having read the report, the chief wants advice.
I'd be quite happy, in that, notwithstanding that, to move that we reopen the matter.
Thank you.
To allow for those who have questions to ask questions.
Okay. So that is item number 7. And that is 5.7 or item number 7?
7.
Okay, so we were really just addressing at the moment the, I thought, the item 5. So is there anybody that wants to hold anything on item 5? Because it was that Ms. Renee was addressing, the whole concept of consent agenda.
I move the recommendation.
So I thought all the rest were 5.6, 5.7. I'm sorry, under 5, the cat has no contact.
The Auditor General's report on drug claims.
Okay, those I read earlier. I don't have any votes there.
I
So-
move the recommendation, which I think was to receive the report.
I thought. So Mayor Tory puts forward the motion that we receive the item number 5. May I have a seconder? Seconder for that, Councillor Carroll. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. That takes us to item 6, and that is the request for a special fund beyond the blue, the Toronto chapter, and there's a deputation. 2. So Dion, you're still there. This is the item number 6, the request for special fund beyond the blue, Toronto chapter.
Did they make their presentation already?
Actually, no, they didn't make a presentation. Ms. Gardner's not here.
They made it, we were saying yes because they made one.
Yes, a few meetings ago. They didn't make a presentation today.
Oh, not today. Okay.
Not today.
Sorry, I am a bit flustered, so you'll have to excuse me. What I wanted to say about this item, one of the wives is mentioned here, and I can't recall her name right now just because I am so flustered and I can't seem to find it in here, but she lost her brother, I believe it was. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Carroll. I wanted to first give my condolences to Ms. Garda, and the idea, as you all know as a board, that wellness of our service members is crucial to their effectability, I don't even get my words, to their effectiveness in the service, and that they should have rights of access to certain, I hate not being able to talk. They should have rights of access to wellness and programs that would assist them. Now, I understand that this is a trial process, but what I want to raise with this board is that if these wives and family members are raising this issue to create a chapter, then that would, in my opinion, suggest that there is a hole somewhere where families and wives and or husbands are affected by the not getting the access that they need under the service to get the helps that they need or the supports that they need. And so, in my own opinion, I mean, you've already probably approved it, and so you should, but I wanted to raise to the board the idea that this comes as a result of a gap that appears to be evident both from the community members that I've spoken with who are married to members of the service who have found things challenging, and more so for those members who have lost loved ones to suicide. So that's what I wanted to address simply for that, for the fact that these issues have been outstanding for some time. And now there's this group wanting to put something along with other chapters throughout Ontario. And I'm wanting to say I support that, but for the board to even take a greater initiative to see what more is perhaps ineffective within the services protocols right now that causes this gap that people feel the need to create these chapters for things that are not available to them now.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Renee. Colleagues, questions or comments?
Well, generally it's questions of the deputant, but in fact I want to give some comfort to the deputant here. Because I think possibly, Dion, you weren't here on the 2 past occasions where Dilna's Garda was here. This proposal, in fact, addresses the gap that they identified. Within the service, there actually is, a robust employee and family assistance program, and it's police geared. It's geared to the challenges of the policing family. The gap that Ms. Garda identified is that there are times when, to be in a safe zone, you need something independent, wholly outside. Whatever we spend on EFAP, you need that outside place in case you don't feel safe doing that. Perhaps in part of your healing you will get to the point where you feel safe and you step back inside, but that is provided for inside. Beyond the Blue is an organization that is saying, but there needs to be that outside safe zone. So in fact, the gap is the thing they are hoping to fill, the outside safe zone. That's what doesn't exist today, and that's what they are in fact creating. I'm very proud of the fact that while it's somewhat unconventional for the special fund, that we're bending the rules because we applaud them filling the gap in this independent way. Yeah.
Colleagues, any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Dion. The next debutant is Brenda.
Councillor Carroll,
Thank you.
I'm a little bit disturbed that I haven't opened my mouth yet, and you've suggested that the board has leaning towards approving Beyond the Blues funding. So I'm going to ask you all to keep an open mind. I want to hand out what I've brought, and I'm going to say, I understand what you're saying, I understand what Dion said, but I'm going to ask everyone to keep an open mind about what I'm about to say, because I think it's important, or I wouldn't have bothered to come. But also, I think that you've all misunderstood part of what it is that that the policeman's sister is trying to say. She's, I don't know, perhaps we're talking at cross purposes. Could I ask your help, please, Mr. Lee? Please, could I have your help? Thank you very much. I'm just going to wait a minute till you all have your copy, or you won't know what I'm talking about.
Okay, Brenda, thank you.
Has everybody got their copy?
They do.
Start? All right, as you know, as we've discussed just a moment ago, a gentleman, a policeman, a good policeman called Policeman Garda was present at what amounts to an execution, and he alone suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, which means that he cared, he was sensitive, he was disturbed by what happened. So he's one of the good policemen that I keep talking about. One of the good policemen that we could not afford to lose. So I was devastated myself. I didn't see this story when it came out. I'm devastated to learn what has happened to him. It bothers me deeply, and I'm going to make a suggestion about what we should do for him in a moment. If you turn the page 2, you will see that some of his friends, some of his acquaintances said how nice he was. They told him not to worry. They patted him on his back. He was a mess. Now, according to the folder that Councillor Carroll was just talking about the family service of the police, there is an emergency service, and it says, for crisis situations, a support specialist can give immediate help. I tried to get you all copies of this pamphlet, and I'm holding the only pamphlet. Apparently this is our one and only pamphlet, and I'm holding it in my hands because I can't find any more and no one's got any downstairs. So I'm hoping that you've all read it. And if you've all seen it and read it, on one of the pages you will see a picture of, I don't know who they are, some people laying on the ground. And I'm going to suggest that when these pamphlets are reprinted, the picture of the people laying on the ground, whoever they are, whatever they're doing, be replaced with a picture of Policeman Garda, saying in loving memory of Policeman Darius Garda, If you're troubled, call for help. And I believe his family should be asked if they would approve of that. And Policeman Garda should become, I don't want to call him the poster boy. He was a good policeman, and that's how he got sick. And I would like them to approve of this gentleman's picture and his thoughts, what he was, a sensitive, caring policeman who was upset about what happened and who couldn't get over it. Nobody recognized the depth of his despair, and I'm appalled that none of the people quoted on page 2 of the story in front of you picked up their phones and dialed the emergency number. It boggles the mind. It boggles the mind. This man has died for no reason except this. I'm not going to allow this to be that he died for no reason. Everybody knows that I think there's the bad police and the good police, and I'm on the side of the good police. And I am not going to let people forget what I just have read in the last few weeks about Garia. Now, Garda, excuse me. Now, third page, last page, Fight Night. Fight Night is supporting this club. I am disturbed about the chasm that the club will create beyond the blue with the public. We are beyond the blue. Page 13, we are the blue family, the blue sisters on page 2. We have badge babies. There will be no membership fees. This is going to create a chasm between the public and the police. The police who, many of them think they're different than the public. This is problematic to me. I do not believe they should receive public funds. I also am disturbed by the fact they're being supported by Gloves Up, a violent event, which Policeman Garda didn't like excessive violence. So it seems strange that they would be supporting, that there's a connection between Policeman Garda, Beyond the Blue, and Gloves Up, which should not, Gloves Up is a euphemism, Gloves Up. They're going to beat each other up. The police are going to stand around beating each other up. That's what it amounts to. It's disgraceful. They should have held a talent night or something to raise funds for Policeman Garda and Beyond the Blue. I don't like the terms that Beyond the Blue uses. The relationships that Chief Saunders has told us he wants to create between the public and the police do not allow these euphemisms. We've got badge babies, we've got blue sisters.
Brenda,
So
thank you. Your time's up.
Can I finish my sentence?
Yes.
I'm asking for two things. That the Garda family be consulted as to whether or not they would allow the photograph of Policeman Garda in memoriam to appear in the folder with the expression, troubled, call for help. I would also, I don't know how this could be done. I guess Chief Saunders will have to tell me how it could be done. But somehow, why are the police not picking up their phones and reporting their friends in trouble? My friends about...
Thank you, Brenda.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Colleagues, questions of the deputant? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. So we've had two deputations. So there is the, so no, item number 6 we have to approve, right? So is there debate, discussion on what we've heard? Yes?
Just a question of staff, because I know that the goal of Ms. Garda and her partner starting the chapter, I know that the goal is to become self-sufficient, to do their own fundraising so that they don't need this level of funding on an ongoing basis. But I'm wondering if the discussion has been had, because I haven't had a one-on-one discussion with her in the last couple of months. I'm wondering if the discussion that has led to the recommendation of the chief and the service today to go ahead with the funding this year of $30,000 to get the chapter started, tech and all, leaves them actually able to apply next year if they don't get all the way to self-sufficiency. Can we sort of phase them there and help them to make sure they've got a healthy chapter? Because I know that is the goal here. Will we be giving them the ability to come back and apply next year so that they can get on an even keel?
I think just by the nature of special fund, it is a one-time donation. We do not fund operating budgets, which would be the implication. So I think it is, by its nature, to a special fund, unless there's an extreme exception that this is a one-time donation.
Well, that's as may be, but if I started hunting through approvals, I will find organizations who have received more than one grant.
Yes, no, you
from
will.
Special funds.
And those are exceptions.
So they
No
should
question.
come back saying, we did the startup, but here's the situation that we have. Would they be treated as a startup and allowed to reapply? Okay, thank you. That's my only concern. I wanted to sort of get that on the record. Because I really think that the initiative needs a fighting chance. I actually, the reason I spoke to one of the deputies about this is I actually believe that having this outside organization, if it's allowed to be healthy, have credible people helping in the organization, they actually have a chance of helping us to work on the stigma that stops officers from accessing EFAP, to work on the stigma that makes families fearful to go forward for when there's family assistance. All of those things need to be broken down, and I know that's one of the goals here. But I think it's also important for folks to know that the work that's going on now with Darius Garda's family is not really because zero was done. It's because despite how very much was done, it is not the case. It's important that people know that. It is simply not the case that no officer highlighted that they were worried about this brother. That is not what happened, despite how the media may be coloring it. That I know. The family is not saying that today, that no one in the service did a single thing. That is not the whole story. And they're quite clear on that. But they do highlight that the stigma is still there. The fear of showing weakness by reporting your own struggle is still there. And that's what needs to be broken down. And that's the mission of Beyond the Blue. And so that is the gap. An organization that sits outside and could perhaps break down that stigma that says, if I say I am not recovering from what happened on the job, I will be a weak officer who won't be promoted, who won't have a future, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's their goal, is to break that down, and I applaud that. And so actually it's time for board members to give their remarks to items now. Deputation time is over. Yep. Thank you. That is my reason for supporting this item, and my reason for clarifying that if they don't get all the way there and they need a little more help for some other purpose within it, right, that we will consider a future application. Thank you.
Colleagues, any other comments, questions?
I think one of the comments I'd like to add to Councillor Carroll's suggestion is, if these people come back next year, would you fund? The answer would be dependent on what their mandate is to use these $30,000, what progress they have made. And I know Ms. Garda came and spoke to me personally in my office. At that time, she had raised two issues. One was the stigma of PTSD and how they were hesitant to get help, which was available over here on the second floor, which they said was an open thing. And the second issue was that they had difficulty filling in the forms with Workmen's Compensation Board to get funding because they didn't know how to fill the forms. They didn't know how to get. Workmen's compensation did not recognize that as a disability. So there was a difference in that, and the family was struggling with financially also. So I think if these are the outcomes that they want to achieve, and if they've got it in their mandate to use these fundings for that purpose, then I think when they come back, we should evaluate it at that point in time, and then see the situation, rather than say, today, will you be able to give it? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
So colleagues, no other comments. Councillor Carroll, you proposing the approval of this motion? May I have a seconder? Dr. Nuria, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you, it's carried. That takes us to item number 7, Councillor Carroll, and there is a deputation. Melissa Graham, she's not been here. Melissa Graham. Okay, there is. Okay. So this is the coroner's inquest into the death of David Andrew Doucette. Dion, if you're going to come in future, you should have something. You need to have something in writing from someone saying that you are deputing on their behalf. Okay.
I'm here on behalf of Melissa Graham, who was not able to attend this meeting today, to speak to item number 7. She had 2 other items, I believe it was 9 and 10. And I'm speaking on behalf of all persons with disabilities. Melissa Graham is the founder of the Disability Pride March and the co-organizer of the march as well. And as some of you may be aware, the march takes place this Saturday, the 23rd at 1 o'clock at Queen's Park. Mr. Doucette, in the information that you have, and again, I'm having some difficulty here, so if you can just give me a minute. I want to be able to refer to the issue that is referenced in this report, and I just have to find it. Had I been able to access this room at the time that I expected to, like everyone else, I would have been a little bit more prepared to speak. If someone has it open and is willing to let me just see the paper, I can reference but I just need to see it. Because there was something in particular, but I'm just shocked right now, so I'm still having, thank you. It was something about, there was some kind of written up report or something, but it was somebody explaining it.
Is the summary of the circumstances of the death?
Yes, but it was entitled explanation or something like that.
Recommendation, 1, 2.
Something was titled explanation.
4, 6, conclusion. And that's all we have.
Oh, I think that, yeah, that's it.
It's part of the verdict.
See,
okay.
It's a verdict explanation.
And
That was
that's
the
it.
issue.
Did you want to keep this?
Thank you. I was actually just trying to find, thank you so much. Do you need it?
No.
Thank you so much. So, part of the reason why I'm deputing for Melissa, she was unable to get out of her meeting today to come here. This board knows on November 17th, 2016, I raised the issue of having meetings in the evening so that people like Melissa could attend these meetings and participate as other members of the public should be able to. It is a great concern that Mr. Doucette is identified as a person with disability. This board is well familiar with the history of persons with disabilities and the interactions and, quite frankly, the negative interactions with police. In this instance, Mr. Doucette died. And it's the idea that you have something identified as verdict explanation. There was actually a jury recommendation, actual document produced by this coroner's inquest. So the question at hand is, why is the coroner's inquest report with the recommendations that were included, why is there a verdict explanation rather than the coroner's report itself for this board to review? Why is there someone, and who is this person who prepared this document for the board? Is it someone who's affiliated with police services? The question is, why is it that an explanation of a coroner's report was provided to this board and not necessarily, or at least based on the information that was presented to be approved by this board today, was an explanation? The other issue that I am to address is the issue of people, jurors making recommendations for over 20 years concerning people identified with disabilities, people known to be Black, people who are Indigenous. Why are the same recommendations being repeated over and over and over again for at least over 20 years based on documentation that we have access to, and nothing has been done? I think on behalf of Ms. Graham, the question remains, and I too question the same, and it's in particular as a result of what happened today to me. The responsibility of this board as an oversight board to call into question when recommendations have not been applied, and call into question why they haven't been applied, and call into question call into question their oversight's responsibility into allowing certain things to be repeated and the same recommendations being same recommendations happening over and over again without any change. That's what I understood that I needed to speak to today. But notwithstanding, I'll just add quickly, because I see Chair Pringle identified 1 minute. And I'm personally speaking this now. It's the idea of people such as Defante Miller and other people who have been assaulted by the police, who are now become identified as persons with disabilities as a result of the actions of our police service. And if our police service is not recognizing the issue of what that means for a person to have a disability as a result of the police, or to have a family experience death as a result of the police, then the public is calling into question the role of this board to do nothing about that.
Thank you, John.
And thank you, Member Molinar, for letting me use your
colleagues, any questions for the deputant? Councillor Carroll?
Well, I'm wondering, because you were asking about the inquest itself. We get a report that speaks to the recommendations. The service responds to them, and we have to, because they have to send something back to the coroner, and so they show it to the board before doing so. But I'm wondering if you've ever been on the coroner's website, where you can get the full inquests and their verdict and their recommendations in real time, so that by the time you're seeing it at the board, you could have done the backstroke through the inquest for a month. Did you know you can go into their website?
So that's why we know over 20 years the same recommendations are being put forward over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And Council,
just wanted to make sure you know that, because you were worried that we weren't getting the inquest itself. We're just getting this report. In fact, one of our duties is to, if we know we're having a report on it, is we go to that site to look at the inquest. To simply, as a matter of producing the paper that shows up here, we go to their site, and that's where we read the report.
No, I certainly appreciate that, Councillor Carroll. The issue is that you have an explanation of the verdict rather than the actual coroner's report, which is the outcome.
But that's why I'm saying I do have it.
No,
it's
what
on
I
a
mean
different
by
website.
that, it makes up this body of information that's at the table today, and I think that's what the community's concern is that you have somebody else, whoever that somebody else is, explaining a coroner's report when there is actually a coroner's report and recommendations made by a jury. We're wondering why that's not part of this parcel in the context for which the whole thing, rather than someone else going somewhere else, a third party doing something else outside. This board has a responsibility to present the full facts, including the documentation that's associated with that. So it only makes up the historical record. I think for the public, when we're looking at that, we're wondering, well, why is there an explanation of the coroner's report rather than the coroner's report itself? Or in addition to...
Okay, so you don't accept the explanation I just gave?
No, I heard your explanation.
So that, if you're looking for a coroner's report, we want people to go to the coroner's website and get the coroner's report. What our duty actually is, our duty is not actually to make sure the public gets the coroner's report. That's the coroner's duty. Our duty is to respond to the recommendations. That's why, as board members, when we wake up in the morning, we get a little missive from Andy telling us the inquest has reported out, this is where we go to get it, to their website. It's the coroner's duty to make public his report, and that's where we go for it. So maybe what we need to add to our report is, it should say in our report, the full inquest and verdict is available at link X, and that link would be to the coroner's website. Would that suffice?
I think what the concern of the public is that why do you have a verdict of the why do you have a verdict explanation as it's so titled rather than the coroner's report itself? We totally get what you're saying, but this is something that somebody else created. So if you can have this, why not just have the coroner's report attached?
Okay, I must not be saying it right, but I've said it, so I can't say it again.
I think I understand the confusion, so let me clarify, and perhaps Joanne Campbell can confirm that my understanding is correct. You are correct that that appendix is a summary, but it is a summary that is crafted by the coroner and was provided to us by the coroner. That does not mean that we ought not to look at the entire coroner's request, which I also hear being part of your recommendation, but I understand that the Appendix A was forwarded to the board via the coroner. Is that correct, Joanne?
I can just tell you that at its January meeting, minute P9 refers, we received a report from our counsel with respect to the verdict and the recommendations of the jury. And this report is in response to that report. I'd have to.
I don't want to belabor
I'd
this.
have to dig down to see if the actual verdict was appended to it.
But is what is before us today, the verdict explanation, do you know? It looks to me like it's created by the coroner. Is that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know that.
Okay,
But it wouldn't be an onerous task in the future.
So we can confirm that for you or
provide
clarify that for you in due course. Thank you.
Yeah, so in the future, we can provide a link to the full report because it's easy to do. It's there on that ministry's website, yeah.
Thank you, Dion. The colleagues, may I have a motion. There are no more deputations. Are there any discussion? Then a motion. Yep, go ahead.
So the other point that the deputant raised was in fact the point that I was going to raise in a slightly different form. We have a growing pile of recommendations now, one from the local inquest, one from this, and I believe another one that keeps speaking to CEWs. And if we adopt this today, this is the chief's response to the recommendations for the service. And so the response in this report is, I agree, but I've already told the board and they're not giving me money for CEWs. So do we want to add to this an action item that says we're reviewing that? Because currently that's not what the board says.
Sorry, Councillor Carroll, I know it's not necessarily
Sorry,
an opportunity to
board,
speak.
yeah, it's board deliberation time now.
The only reason why I want to say that is because the public is not agreeing with
Yeah,
CEWs.
right now the board is deliberating. We're done with deputations. Thank you.
Yeah,
so I need a question from
If you could
staff.
just-
Should we be looking for adding a recommendation to this, or in fact requesting an additional report? Because if we receive this, the instructions are to forward this report back to the coroner, and in it is, and quite rightly so, because it's an accurate reflection. The report says you think we should have CEWs for all officers. The chief of Toronto Police says, I agree. I have notified the board of this, and that's the end of the description for recommendation number 2. Do we have a next step? Are we looking at a future report? Are we only looking at a budget request? What is the future of consideration of this? Because the number of recommendations asking us to look at it is growing. I know it's controversial, but
we
it's
are
there.
in the process of setting up a mechanism, as you'll recall, or actually you weren't a board member then, but 4 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, there was extensive consultation on CEWs. The decision of the board at that time was unanimously not to expand it.
Yes,
the chief has asked.
Locally do that.
Well, no, every inquest, I think, recommendation since then has asked us to explore it.
Okay.
The chief has asked us to set up a process whereby we would review that again. And at the previous board meeting, you recall, we talked to him about reviewing all methods of reduction of force. So we're in the process of getting a date to review CEWs and letting the community know that. Have we got a date yet?
We have a tentative date. It would be an evening meeting, October 18th.
So, do we want to append that to this? The recommendation is forward a copy of this report back to the coroner for the coroner's comfort, for the community's explanation. Do we want to attach this? We have in fact scheduled a process to revisit the issue.
Do you want to add an amendment? Do you want to add an amendment to this?
Is it conventional? I'm asking procedurally, is that what you do with the coroner's report? I just think we shouldn't send it back making it look as if there's some dispute between ourselves and the
We can if
chief.
you want. We've already engaged the process, so I think it's, you know, suspenders and belt, but if you wish to add an amendment, please do.
An amendment to the, forward a copy that, or receive the following report for information.
This is a motion to approve.
Well, it's a motion to receive and mail this
Yes.
report back to the
Yes,
coroner.
that's correct.
I'm simply pointing out the recommendation 2 looks like the chief agrees with the coroner and we don't, because it doesn't actually say we've got future process coming down the pipe.
Colleagues, any thoughts? My sense is we've already got the thing underway, but you decide.
No, we do. I know that we do, and so do you, but the coroner doesn't. We're mailing a report to him now that says nothing about the fact that we agree that we need to revisit it as well.
So then,
And since he said it to us 3 times now, should I amend so that he knows that we're looking at it at some point in the very near future? Do you want to add it to receive and? Do you want to make a standalone motion? I really think we should send it back with something along those lines.
colleagues, any thoughts? Councillor Lee?
I'm just looking for the procedural appropriate way to do it. I just think it's meaningful. Okay, I'm going to say it one more time. The recommendations, this is a report in response to coroner's inquest recommendations. The response to recommendation number 2, which is the coroner's recommendation that we look at CEWs being deployed across the service. You're on duty, you're holding a taser. That is not the decision the board took in the past. That is not our current deployment of those weapons. The chief's recommendation, quite rightly so, it's not a surprise, he's said it before, he agrees with that recommendation. What it says in there is, I agree with that recommendation, I've told the board, which is an accurate reflection of where we are now. What it doesn't tell the coroner is that we do in fact have plans to review that in the very, very near future. I think we should tell him that, because this is not the first time that's been recommended by the coroner. They're up there at Morton Schulman asking themselves, how many times do we have to tell those guys to buy some more tasers? We want to consider it. I think we need to attach a recommendation. Is that conventional and procedural? I think we should do it.
Councillor Lee?
I don't see any reason why you can't do it if that's what you want to communicate to the coroner.
I don't think there's anything preventing us from informing the coroner. That's what we intend to do. But what I just heard Ms. Renee saying that the public doesn't seem to agree with having more CEWs.
Let me be clear.
So I think that's
why we're having our review. I'm saying we should tell the coroner we're going to have that review. Okay. That's why we're not going to arbitrarily buy them. We have to have that.
I think you move the motion. Councillor Carroll, Councillor Lee, let me be clear.
I'm not making myself
okay, I hear you. I'm trying to interpret. Our own mental health subcommittee does not have some concerns about the expansion of the use of tasers. We have had not just this, but almost every report, including the Akabuchi report, recommend we expand it. The provinces recommended that. The chief has asked that we expand it. We are in that process. It's entirely up to you if you feel it's appropriate and you want to add something to this recommendation to do so, and your colleagues will vote on it.
Okay, so what I would add, and I'm sorry I haven't written this down again, I don't know if you've already wordsmithed it. Do you want me to attach it to recommendation number 1? Is that the easiest? Okay, then I would receive the following report for information and inform the coroner that the Toronto Police Service Board will be reviewing its deployment of CEWs in the near future. Their expansion of
that's the expanded motion by Councillor Carroll. Is there any discussion? Seconded by Councillor, you're ahead of me. Seconded by Councillor Lee. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Carroll. We have one more held, I think, and that's item number 10. and the recommendation to for the payment of legal indemnification, case number 2089-17. Dion, you have a deputation, and Melissa Graham as well. I may say, Dion, that when you were downstairs, item number 9, which is the appointment of special constables to Community Housing Corporation and the increase of the strength, was one that Melissa Graham had asked to speak on. It's already been passed. As I told you downstairs, if you wish to talk on that as well, I'll give you a little longer to do it. But again, Dion, I would tell you that in the future, we will need something in writing if you are going to represent a deputant that's down to speak and you want to do it on their behalf. So I'll give you longer than the 5 minutes if you want to cover off both of these.
Chair Pringle, is that in your policies? Because I didn't see it in your policies. Your rules, the board's rules.
Yes, it's you know, we if you've come and given your name to speak, I need verification that you're going to have the authorization to speak on someone else's behalf.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So I will endeavor if it so happens, but again, the issue is that sometimes people can't show up to these meetings because they're in the afternoon and they can't get out of the obligations that they already had, and or the fact that people are outside this building because they can't access it because they're not willing to submit to a warrantless search or to be arbitrarily
John, as
detained.
you know, I give a fair amount of leeway here.
No.
But I'm letting you know what
yes.
the, okay?
Thank you.
So thank
and
you.
The
You've
other
got
issue is that I can only speak to some of it because the person, as you know, is you mentioned her. She's I should say they is downstairs waiting to come to speak to this issue. So I only am speaking in part, and this person is going to also speak to some. I guess the question is, in Mayor Tory, I don't see him here. I thought he was here.
He had to leave.
He spoke to the issue today on the news in reference to the hiring practices of the city, and that the constables for the Toronto Community Housing is funded through the city's budget rather than the police services budget. So there's confusion to the members of the public as to why this is an issue under the Toronto Police Services Board concerning an increase in, quote, the approved strength of constables at the within Toronto Police Service, within Toronto Community Housing. And much more, the question arises with community is that are these police officers or people who are not police officers? Because as you know, TAVIS was disbanded as a result of numerous complaints by the public, and there's a question is whether or not members of TAVIS are now being redeployed to this position as special constables. And that's what I know so far from the deputation that's being made, because people are wondering why certain and particular communities, such as Toronto Community Housing, are being over-policed, and why these specific communities are targeted to have policing there. I'm going to go downstairs. Well, I'm not going to go downstairs. Well, I guess I have to go downstairs because my bag is down. I think our friend was there to, yeah. So maybe someone will go down to let Scout come up to speak. Thank you so much.
No, okay.
No, you don't, no one knows what's going on because of, oh great, Scout's here, excellent. It is your town.
Wait a minute, who is Scout?
Scout is also here yeah, but Scout is also going to be speaking.
No, she did not, and we're not allowing it.
No, Scout is speaking for the remainder of Melissa Graham's time.
No, it does not work that way. I'm sorry. There is a procedure. Well, it just doesn't. You know, there is lots of opportunity to do it. If she has something in writing, it has something in writing, then I'm happy to do it. You were here, and I've said to you, you can speak on your behalf, on her behalf, but we're not playing fast and loose.
So Scout is identifying that information was submitted online through your through the online information, and it was confirmed. So there is an issue here.
So, Dion, you are the deputant to speak. Please.
On behalf of Melissa, yes.
Yes, so if you're finished, thank you very much. If not, you've got a couple more minutes. And if you also wish to address the item number 10, which is the legal indemnification, which is what you're actually speaking on.
Okay, so I am saying that I am welcoming Scout to take the remainder of my time so that this issue of complication for the information, Scout, as you know, was downstairs watching the as a result of these incidents.
I met them down there. I cannot.
Scout to speak for the remainder of my time period, and I'm wondering why that is a problem when Scout registered to speak to this issue.
Scout did not by the deadline, so I'm sorry. Please, you are here. You speak to it yourself, please.
Scout, did you want to finish the remainder for me? Well, I do feel horrible about this because I thought I was only speaking to so much and that Scout would speak to the remainder.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, are there any questions of Ms. Renee? Okay. John, thank you. Councillor Lee, go ahead.
I think Ms. Renee was asking a question why TCHC is paying and yet is coming here to police board, special constables role. So I'm going to ask on the behalf that why is it here as opposed to being decided at City Council. Chief, can you answer that, please?
Thank you. Special constables are the hiring and the firing by the board, and police agencies are responsible for the training, discipline, and screening of special constables in Ontario.
Can I shed a little light here? I don't know if Councillor Lee remembers this, or, well, you remember revitalization in your area. Part of the reason that you're seeing them ask for an increase in complement, and they will pay for these people. Some sections of Alexander Park are opening back up. Allenbury Gardens Phase 1 in my area is opening back up, and so we're expanding back up. And what the residents themselves asked for, we have a very participatory budgeting, participatory decision-making process where tenants choose to engage in it in parts of TCHC. And in those consultations that they had in Alexander Park and in my development, which is quite a bit more suburban, they heard the same thing, that they wished that if a special constable was going to become known as that guy on the ground, similar to what we're doing ourselves with the connected on-the-ground officer that we're trying to get to, was that they didn't want a bunch of strangers who were on these crazy shifts of, which came about as a result of budget cuts. It was a total stranger. Miguel is nodding his head, thank you. Some crazy stranger that was here and only here for 2 hours, and then he was supposed to get in a car and go over here. And the kids didn't get to trust him, and he didn't get to establish his authority that he needed to have. Could we have a few more officers so that they were longer on duty and building better neighborhood relationships as special constables, just as we do with our fully fledged police officers? But it was the tenants that asked for that they would have those types of more familial and respectable and more neighborhood relationships with their special constable. And so they asked for a little more complement. Somewhere in their budget, miraculously, the TCHC board responded to that. And I know that Allenbury Gardens in my area, as Phase 1 comes back, is one of the beneficiaries of that. They're going to have, instead of constables that are round robining between Villaways, Brahms Village, Chester Lee, and Allenbury Gardens, they're going to have someone who's actually there for 6 hours at a stretch and doing the kind of community work they want them to do with youth. So I'm happy to see the increased complement.
Any other questions, comments? Dion, thank you. Councillors, then it's a question of we've heard from Dion on behalf of Melissa Graham on the special constables. It's already been passed. I take it you do not want to reopen that item, so that stands. Item number 10 was the legal indemnification case 2089-17. Dion, you were down to speak on that as well. Did you wish to say something before we put it to a vote?
Pardon me?
This is item number 10, which is the legal indemnification case 2089-17. I've got you down to speak on that. That's item number 10.
Yes. I just want to find it here. If someone has it handy, that would be helpful. Thank you. Right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I guess from my part, in communicating with the public, I know that we've raised this with the board before, so it's good to see that this is on the board's agenda. We're surprised why we don't see more of these legal indemnification cases addressed or raised, but at least this one is here. And I think part of the concern of the public is the fact that this was, we're assuming, but I don't know for sure, and the board would know, whether or not an actual hearing took place in relation to this member of police services. And what's absent from this report with regards to payment is the constable's name. What's absent is whether or not charges were deferred, so you know you plea on another thing and not on the other issues. Whether or not charges were withdrawn, like how did this come about? Because it seems to be that there's a lot of information missing that's not clear to the public about this particular matter, whether you believe it should be or not. But the point is, if anyone says, well, why should the constable's name be listed? If in fact a hearing did take place, it would have been a public meeting. So that's why we're wondering whether or not an actual meeting, we're not really sure what happened in this case. I'm not sure what happened in this case. I see there's a reference number, and to find that reference number, there's no indicator as to how someone should find that reference number. I'll show you. Sorry. The article 12.10 that it refers to says that shall be deemed to have been found not guilty where he or she finally acquitted, where the charges are withdrawn, or where he or she is discharged following a preliminary inquiry. None of those that we know specifically about this case. And it would be interesting to know, because that is the way in which we're able to look at statistics, how this board is able to look at the statistics in order to really exercise its responsibilities under its oversight authorities as to what recommendations or what policies it wants to see in place or what needs to be changed for more transparency and accountability. Sorry, I have a hard time talking because my tongue is swollen, so if I sound a little bit garbled, just tell me. But you know, these things are not clear here, and in your own article under the collective agreement for police services, it gives outs. So we're curious why $297,729.92 was paid out or is asked to be paid out. And I'm wondering, is there ever a time that this board doesn't approve of a payment of legal indemnification? Is there a time where you say, nope, it's going to come out of your pocket, or because quite frankly, it really always comes out of the public's pocket, right? This purse is the public's purse. And so we're just curious about that. Those are the issues that I raise. The issue that Melissa wanted raised concerning this particular agenda item are in line with what I've raised, so I won't repeat that. But also the fact of whether or not statistics have been initiated by this board of the history of policing, even if it's just within the short period of time that you have been board members. Whether or not there are statistics with information, such as what I've raised today, the name, the issues that were before whomever, because again, we're not sure. Was this a tribunal? Was it the court? We're not sure. And what was the, excuse me, outcome as to why one of these issues under Article 12.10 was recognized, because it is not recognized. So that's the question on behalf of community members from Melissa's perspective as to how is this board really following through with the accountability and being able to look at and properly assess the goings-on of public expenditure for police involvement in something. And again, we don't know what.
All right, thank you, Dion. Colleagues, questions? If not, yeah, I have a question of staff to me. You go ahead, though.
Question of staff? Yeah, I don't have a question for the deputy. I was just going to say maybe we want to give the solicitor a chance to explain, you know, legal indemnification is a collective bargaining issue, but confidentiality is part of settlement, part of whatever, yeah.
There was the board gets a more detailed report on its confidential agenda that identifies the individuals and much more detail about the circumstances. The information is not put on the public agenda because it could be a violation of individuals' privacy in relation to certain employment information, and so that is why those details are not included on the public. So the board is more intimately familiar with what's going on and can evaluate some of the things that the deputant is referring to. So that's the basis of it. There may be possible to expand some of this, but without transgressing those privacy concerns, but some of the information would remain confidential.
So if I can follow up, if it were a case where the case involved was quite public and the officer was named, settling the payment of the legal bill sometimes still remains private. Is that, am I right about that?
There's a distinction between what happens in the criminal prosecution or whatever occurred here and what happens in relation to the employment benefit. No, my mic is on. My mic is on. I'm just talking quietly. So that there's a distinction to be drawn between those two things, I think, between what happens in a public hearing and then what goes on in terms of the private employment, the private employment situation. Better?
Yes, right.
Sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Carroll. No, I was going to ask exactly the same question you just did, so thank you.
Well, then if we're on to speakers, I'll just say that we maybe at some time should look at how we might create sort of a guidebook that explains the difference between these situations, because it came up the other night at budget. Miguel will remember occasionally a settlement is reached, sometimes involving a police officer, but it's a legal out of the courtroom settlement, and as often happens when you're doing a settlement, the settlement and the amount is arrived at on the promise that neither side is ever going to speak of this. That flies in the face of our hopes for transparency at all times, but it is nevertheless a common agreement sometimes reached in legal settlements. That doesn't mean that the rules of the case itself would have different rules. If we have an SIU and we have an officer up on charge, for that stuff, we still go through the steps and release reports at the correct junctures. Am I reflecting that the right way?
That's correct, but what you're referring to in terms of a settlement that would be confidential. That's true. That's correct what you're saying, but what you're referring to in terms of a settlement that would be, by virtue of the settlement, be kept under wraps usually refers to, I think, civil settlements and in claims where the parties say, in order for it to be settled, without any finding of fault, we have to agree to keep this private. And in most cases, it would probably be the insurer that would be involved in those cases because they'd be paying the freight for any damages that would be paid out as a result of that civil suit.
Right.
Okay, so we're drawing a distinction. This is criminal or statutory offenses, not civil suits. Different situation entirely.
Right. And so realistically, we can expect that if you know, in a case like this, if we were to say exactly who this officer was, and guess what, we paid this much legal bill on him, that's an unfair thing to leave on an identifiable individual. But his case, the case for which these legal bills were incurred, that went through the transparency rules that we have for cases. So you would have known his name at the time. That is divulged when it's appropriate to have it divulged, and not when it's not appropriate. Yeah.
If it was subject to SIU review, if it was subject to other reviews, then it would have gone through the exact same process. I can't speak right now to the extent to which the name would, identity would be revealed, but yes, it would go through the same process if it entered the jurisdiction of those other oversight bodies.
Yeah, yeah. And so, Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to move this. I'm not crazy about the amount, but
none of us are, and you know,
but I do, you know, fully appreciate that, because that is our rule under our collective bargaining agreement, and it's reported here when it is a large amount. That doesn't mean that where you should have known the outcome of a case and the name of the officer, it wasn't released. It was released at that time. But this is a very unique thing. You can see where something like this, we put the named officer in there, whether he was guilty or not guilty or whatever he went through as a result of the verdict. Later on, we have to deal with the legal bill. I would not want to see this show up on the front page of the Sun. You could incur this kind of a legal bill in a case where rightly so, the officer was found to be exonerated of all charges, could be not guilty, and still a legal bill of this size could be incurred. You would hate for the Toronto Sun to say, let's hate this officer anyway because of his legal bill. And so this is a case where I actually support confidentiality. You know, it's the social media times we live in, and you know darn well there'd be a picture of him and his legal bill on the front of the Toronto Sun. And if it was a case where he was found not guilty, that would really be unfair. Yeah.
Colleagues, any other comments or questions of staff? If not, a motion to approve. Councillor Carroll, seconded. Councillor Lee, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Under other business, because I think that completes the agenda, let me refer to the discussions that Ms. Renee was talking about downstairs, and that is that we have had for the past 4 months a security system in place, as it is in courthouses, as it is at Queen's Park, as it is in Ottawa, and it's fair to say at Parliament Hill, and it's fair to say, I think, is coming everywhere given the international terrorism, etc. It is something that the police chief has put in place because he deems it to be important to ensuring public safety. A number of people, Ms. Renee, one of them, Chris Langenfeld, another frequent debutant as well, object to that. And so, Mark, I said, Chief Saunders, I said I would bring it up under other business, just for you to give an opportunity for explanation. It happens every day, and has for the past 4 months.
So first off, before I have council come up and explain, it has been, once it was initiated, it is every day. It is not just board day, and it is for everyone. If you are a member of the Toronto Police Service, and if you are not in uniform and you do not have identification, you are subject to search. And that is the rule every time that you go in and out of the building. If you're in full uniform, you're not searched, but if you're not in uniform, you have to have identification that shows that you're representative of the Toronto Police Service. From a legal perspective, Ms. Renee, can you please, I believe you're done? Thank you.
I thought you were saying that I'm speaking to something, Chair Pringle.
This is other business. Thank you.
Sorry, but I thought you said I was speaking to other business.
You can have a chance afterward, after you've given the chief a chance.
Oh.
So you step aside, I'm happy to let Lisa ask Mary Ann to come in and give the legal. After we've heard it, I'll ask you if you want to make a deposition.
That's not what my understanding was. My understanding was that this was becoming other business. I was going to be able to raise it, to present to the board exactly what happened today, and that this board was going to take that information.
Sorry, Ms. Renee, you can do that. I have asked, however, the chief to make I've asked him a question first. It has staff. I will then ask you after we've had the chief's answer. So if you would kindly step aside, I will call upon you as soon as the chief has answered the question I've asked him. Marianne?
Good afternoon, members of the board. Is this on? The chief has, sorry, I have a terribly quiet voice, so I have to be. The chief has asked me to speak to this from a legal perspective, and obviously there's public policy considerations as well as legal considerations, and they're kind of entwined. But as a lawyer, I'm going to speak to you from that point of view. We'll start from the starting point, which is in a democracy and in matters of government, it's always best if everything is open and to encourage public participation and freedom of expression. But there is no automatic right of entry into a government building, and sometimes we use the word public building and government building interchangeably. This building was, at one point in time, a building from which, unlike many other police buildings actually, the public could have fairly easy access and egress, and the precincts are built at a time back in the 1980s where you can actually access upstairs onto the second floor through the stairs. Now, what is the law on the matter? The way you are able to discern the difference between public and private, because there's many degrees of public and private, is by notice and by the measures the occupants take to establish whether something's public or private. So libraries, for example, don't have free access all the time at the public's will. There's a number of other buildings as you can think of. So in this instance, after consultation, or not consultation, but after advising the board and having a gentle discussion with the board around their views, because they are co-occupants of the building, the chief, who is best placed from the expertise point of view, made a security decision about what is best for this building. Following that, notices were put at the front entrance, and everyone who is a member of a class not belonging to members of the police service or of the board was then asked to submit to a search if they wished to enter the building. This is not a search that is involuntary. The public have a choice when they enter the building whether they want to come into the building, what they would like to bring in the building. So Ms. Renee, for example, was here last month and would be familiar with the procedures, would be familiar with the intrusions, and would be familiar with the process. The security itself, in terms of the grounds that we're relying on, I don't think you need a large security presentation to be aware of the current climate that we live in, or of the fact that there was an incident within a few days of the introduction of these security procedures. So really, to recap what is a complex area and something on which I haven't formally written an opinion, just coming from basic principles, government buildings are not all public buildings in the sense that the public has free access. There has been notice provided. There are physical at the front impediments to the entry that are clear to the public, and the license of the public to enter is granted conditionally upon submission to a search, and the search is not a search that's based on any particular profiling. It's all members of the public all the time. So subject to any questions, I hope I haven't been too technical in my explanation.
Thank you, Marianne. Colleagues, questions before I ask, questions before I ask Ms. Renee to come and just relate her concerns and her experience this afternoon. Councillor Carroll?
I'm wondering if I should wait till after or beforehand to talk
Let's
about
get it all.
what's going on at City Hall right now.
Yeah, why don't you do that, and then we'll...
City Hall, like this building, has been categorized as a risk category B for quite some time now. But arriving at how we're going to retrofit the front entrance is a little harder to achieve consensus on, because there's 45 of us to make happy. But it is a reality that it has to be looked at. It has long been highlighted for us, all the way up to the federal level, dating back to long before my time. Since after the death of Oscar Fonseca in Osgood Hall, who was a banking client, a friend of mine, lawyer, and he was shot in Osgood Hall when Osgood Hall was just a great old heritage building with no security at all, and he was shot standing right in a courtroom. And we began to look at security in this city, in public spaces. So the first time I went there for lunch as a city councillor and had to have my bag looked through and had to be wanded, and I always have to be wanded. I have a piece of metal at the back of my neck, which is fun in any airport. I did the 360 in a few European airports. I don't begrudge it, because I see the face of that man every time. I see Oscar Fonseca's face from 1982 standing in front of me at my banking counter. So you want to look in my purse when I'm walking in Osgood Hall, I will do it. I went to see a city councillor at New York City Hall, Brad Lander from Brooklyn. And New York City Hall, as you can well imagine, is right around the corner from Ground Zero. It's a Category A risk building. And we got a phone call in our hotel a couple of days before asking if by any chance we were planning on bringing a car to our appointment with Brad. And I said, well, yeah, as it happens, we are. We rented a car, which I'd almost never do in New York, but we rented one because we had another plan that involved driving somewhere. And he said, well, you'll have to get here 45 minutes early, because it's going to take you a while to get through the checkpoints, and we have to scan your car first. Scan my car? I'm a counselor. I am a counselor coming to see a counselor. He said, not from New York, you're not. You don't have a badge. And so we had to arrive 45 minutes early, and someone had to scan my entire car. And then I had to go in the front door of City Hall and go through a checkpoint there and prove on paper that I had an appointment with Brad Lander. And then I was in the lobby, where there are services like our City Hall, where you can get permits and the like, to get on the elevator, to go through another checkpoint, exactly the same, and prove again that I had a reason to go up the elevator. And lastly, having had my car scanned and gone through 2 checkpoints, when I got off the elevator, I had to stop and talk to another human and prove all my badges. By the time I got into Brad's office, I was festooned with stickers of all sorts. And my car was downstairs being watched, because it was a strange car. That's Category A. So, you know, if Category B is what it is, which means that, like Osgood Hall, my recommendation as councillor has been, if we have to do this, we have to do it. But let's not destroy the architectural integrity of the building. Figure out a way to do it so that up to the checkpoint, the majesty of Ravel's building is still there. And after the checkpoint, if you go through the checkpoint, the reward you get for going through the checkpoint is beyond that point. We can go back to the openness of the inside of the building that was Ravel's vision for a city hall. And that's going to take some money to achieve, and it's going to take a lot of conversation with councillors to achieve. But I'm willing to go through the process, because I don't want to do it in a crappy, ugly fashion. I want to do it in a way that achieves all things for all people. But I think we have to recognize that we have been going through those checkpoints to get through the airport, to get through a courthouse, to get through a number of places for a long time. The only reason you're not going through that at City Hall is because we are so procedurally slow when we do these things. Our security forces started studying how we were going to keep that place safe. They actually started studying it shortly after 9/11 on a federal recommendation, and here we are, it's now 2017. And we're finally going to come to grips with it in the very near future, whether people like it or not. If it becomes a hot button election issue, so be it. But we are finally going to have to consider the recommendations that have come at us from the feds for a long time.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll, for putting that in context. Any other comments before I ask Ms. Renee to make a deposition on the account?
Just very general comments. You talked about government buildings, but when you go to the ball game, when you go for any of these public events, when great speakers come, I've had my purse looked into all the time. I'll just mention two other things. Even when you travel internationally, when I was in Turkey, we are paying for the hotel, we are staying in the hotel. When I go to India, when you visit a hotel, your car is frisked underneath, and we are checked all the time, including our baggage and the purses and the gifts that you may have bought. But we take it as a normal process and go through it, because I know in the end I'm safer because of that.
Thank you, Dr. Nuria. Thank you, Marianne. Ms. Renee, do you wish to make some comments?
I believe you know I do. Firstly, traveling is not what we're doing here. We're not going internationally. We're not going outside of our country. We're coming to a local public meeting. This is not the court. Unlike the court, this is a public atmosphere where you allow participants to both observe and give deputations. This is not what the court is about. The court is not allowing parties to come, the public to come to make deputations on issues that are affecting their lives. The court decides on issues, and quite frankly, this may become an issue that the court is going to decide on. What I can say is that what the police services has done is not what the representative, the lawyer has just said. What happened is that this information, as of June 26, a police officer posted pictures on Twitter, for which I retweeted, asking questions of the service, for which there were no response, saying, what's going on here? Is this a movie set, or is the Prime Minister in town? And no response. So I had to come here for myself to see if this is actually what was being done, because he was kind of joking about, oh, look what we're doing, you know. And I thought, well, this certainly can't be, because talking to Superintendent Bergen and understanding what you've said, Chair, about the way forward, I said, no way can the police board have allowed something that creates barriers to be implemented at police headquarters and think that that is part of the way forward, or that builds community relationships. And so I came down myself and observed this obstruction that is at the front entrance. So I asked to speak to a supervisor, waited some time, and finally a staff lawyer came down. And I asked the staff lawyer several questions, including, did the board approve of allowing Toronto Police Services to create this obstruction? The second question I asked was this ever raised publicly to the board and to the public? None of those answers that she had an answer to. So I did my own research between June 26 and now to find out that the City of Toronto has its policies in place that maintains that barriers cannot be constructed. In fact, that's a breach of the AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. That's the first breach. And how that is a breach and what's identified under the AODA, a breach is, and it kind of falls in line with the issues that we've been raising concerning carding. It's the idea of psychological barriers, which is what has been created at the front. You have people not now coming to public meetings as a result of the barrier that was created by the police service that has not been approved by the board. You have people not physically being able to come in for anxiety reasons or all of that, having their person searched and their belongings searched. You have people arbitrarily being detained as a result of that, and it is not based on consent. It's a false consent, because I did not consent to having my goods searched today. In fact, I identified to this board in writing on the last occasion for this meeting that I do not consent to to being subjected to a warrantless search, which is what's happening at the front entrance. I do not consent to any search and seizure of my goods. And I came in without issue on the last occasion when I came. Today when I came, I did the same thing, walked in, and all of a sudden when I went to the front desk to ask, as I normally do, because I need the elevator to get upstairs, and that's a side issue because there's discrimination with regards to disability and accessibility here at this board, which put in writing to this board, and hope that that will be appropriately addressed in the near future. But all of a sudden, a tall officer came up behind me and said, "Ma'am, you need to be searched." I said, "Well, no, I don't consent to that." So the issue is when people say, no, they don't consent to it, because this lawyer is suggesting, well, people have the choice to consent to it. Well, wait a minute. Are you saying if we say no, well, then fine, we can come in. But what you're saying is if you don't consent, you don't enter. And that's what happened today. Moreover, at the front desk downstairs, when this officer said to me, I said to him, "I don't consent." He goes, "Well, ma'am, you have to leave." I said, "No, I'm here for a public meeting, and I'm going to make deputations." And then I asked the front desk person to ask for the supervisor. Now, the police have a policy here, so they don't get into a confrontation with the public. They have a policy here to actually call a supervisor when requested. That was not followed through. So that policy that's been in place was not followed through, much like the members of the public have when police officers arbitrarily stop them and question them, and they don't have to consent to that detainment and want to walk away, and a police officer puts their hands on them, leading to an assault by police. Well, I was assaulted by a Toronto police officer here today. Downstairs, when I asked for a supervisor, that officer was refusing to get a supervisor. I said, "Well, actually, you're required to do that." And eventually he put on gloves. So I'm thinking, where's he going putting on gloves? Comes around, puts his hand on my back. I said, "No, I don't consent to you putting your hands on me. Please remove your hands from my body." Which I am surprised that he thought he could do that with the training that officers are supposed to have. Then I said, "Please step away from me. You're making me anxious. I do not want your hands on my body." Ultimately, where he grabbed me, I held onto the desk at the front desk. I said, "Let go of me, you're hurting me." He put his arms around my neck. I said, "I have injuries." He took me, twisted me, and threw me to the ground. I will show you. My knee has a bruise on it. I can't lift it up, but my knee, if you want to look for it yourself. I will show you my wrist that has bruises on it as a result of your officer. I will show you my lip that has blood stain on it and the cut on my tongue inside, and you can see the bruises on my neck. I can tell this board that you all know that we have been trying to work as community to assist you to build the reputation of this police force. And here it is. I'm coming into a public meeting and have this occur to me. I am forced to sit here in my pain and endure sitting patiently in my oppression and pain to wait to speak to this issue. And this is where I say to you, are you looking at things humanely or just operationally, excluding the fact that you're dealing with individuals? Because I can't even believe that this happened to me today. I can't even believe it, but I don't know why I'm so surprised considering what community has been saying for decades. And I have now experienced firsthand being assaulted by a Toronto police officer today. And I will be following up with the onerous complaint process, and you will be hearing, and I hope it doesn't become a consent item as to injuries. I hope it doesn't become something where people are not identified. I was ultimately obtained the card of the police officer, but he refused to give it to me. This is in your own headquarters downstairs just below you here. Moreover,
thank you,
you said that I could speak to this as an issue,
yes.
Chair Pringle. I've been assaulted here firsthand at the police service. I've sat here in my pain, which I'll now go to the hospital after this, despite having another meeting that I was supposed to attend. I am limited now in attending that meeting as a result of what occurred today. I did not consent to a search. I did not consent consent to a warrantless search or to be arbitrarily detained. I was not arrested. I was not under arrest. So how is it that you have an officer put his hands on me? The point that I'm making is this: you have now created a barrier for which was never raised before this board, and here's a reason that I know for a fact that this board could not consent to such a process taking place, because the City of Toronto itself says that it has policies to ensure accessibility and that people's rights are not breached, including their charter rights and under the Human Rights Code. No other city office, I understand what Councillor Carroll said, but at this time right now, historically as well, no other city meetings that are public are impeded in this fashion. And moreover, there are people who are not in this room because they have been impeded in access.
Thank you. You've made your point.
You said to me
thank you very much.
that I could speak to this and raise it. This is
and
how
I give you a time limit, and thank you.
No, but it's not. Okay,
thank you, Dion. Colleagues, questions of Dion? Okay, thank you very much. Listen, sorry, Marie?
I don't have questions, but I think that what has happened today is very, very difficult for you more than anyone else. And I know that you will follow your rights, and you ought to. And I want to say thank you for persevering. It has felt absolutely clumsy to have someone who's visibly in pain, no matter what happened, sit here and wait to speak. We're not as human as we're not as inhuman as we appear to be in these roles, and you have clearly been through a lot today. You are someone who has come here regularly. You have offered valuable advice to us, and we respect that, and I'm very sorry that you've had to experience what you experienced today. I do not know what happened, so I say this not knowing anything about what happened. I understand, and I take at face value what you have told us here, but I'm very sorry that this happened to you, and I respect that you have taken the time and sat here, and I do appreciate that you will follow your rights as you should. So
thank you, Member Muller. So
any other comments or questions, colleagues? If not, Ms. Renee, I sat down with you downstairs. I echo my colleagues' concerns. This is a process that we regret, unfortunately, that we feel, and the chief feels he has to put in the security measures. We will review it. I will ask the chief to review and report back at the next meeting. I agree with my colleague, Ms. Muller, that you are someone who comes here regularly, adds valuable discussion to what we are doing. I'm sorry that, and we will investigate exactly what happened downstairs today, and if there is action required, we will take it. But the bottom line is that at the moment we have these procedures in place, put in place by the chief, not unique. We will review them, but until such time as the board sees, and you've heard from a couple of board members about what we see as the future of security levels that need to be put in place. But we will review these going forward. And again, my sincere apologies for the discomfort and the upset that you've gone through today. Dr. Nguyen?
Yeah, may I also add that I do find this regrettable of what has happened to you and how it has happened to you. So I'm sure most of the board members around it feel the same way. And as the chair mentioned, the policy is in place, but the way it's implemented is really not right. So the chair, I'm sure the chief is going to follow up and make sure that it doesn't happen again.
The problem with having a policy in place that was never approved by the board is the problem, much like the police coloring of cars, where cars were ordered without the approval of the board. It's the same instance that this was put into place without the approval or notification to the public.
Thank you very much. We delegate to the chief the responsibility of acting as he sees fit to ensure public safety. I've said that we will review this.
This is not public safety. The bruises on my body, the injuries that I sustained, what about the public's actual safety? The physical safety of the individual?
Ms. Renee, we will review that, and we'll review the actions downstairs today. Again, my apologies for the hurt that you've gone through today. I have asked, and we're asking the chief now to review this and come back to us, but I think you get the sense of the direction that the necessity for security is taking. Chief Saunders, do you want to add something?
Yeah, when we talk about review, I just want to be clear. Are we reviewing the investigation based on a complaint that's going to come through, or are we going to review the threat assessment and what the world environment is today?
Yeah, I think
I've given that discussion before.
I know, and I think in this case it makes sense for you to come back again, unless my colleagues disagree. Just to reiterate, Councillor Carroll, do you disagree?
I don't actually need that.
Okay.
We provided with
Miguel, be quiet.
because these guys have weapons.
Miguel,
Stop
it.
Why are you afraid? I'm not afraid of you. I need a
sit down. So, Chief Saunders, our colleagues, Councillor Carroll has suggested she does not need the chief to come back. In effect, we are comfortable with the measures taken. Does anybody dissent from that? Ms. Muller?
I would like to understand now that we know what this has come to, how we will avoid doing, making these kinds of decisions, because I do recognize that this is the second time we've had a decision that's made with operational imperatives, but hadn't fully appreciated that there would be a public consequence. So this is the second time, and unfortunately today it came to a head. So I would like to have some reflection on what we would have done differently to bring the matter forward, knowing full well that we're living in a new era. But I think I very much agree, because all of us were surprised when we walked through the doors the first, as board members, I think, thinking, oh, I didn't know, as you have pointed out, Ms. Renee, I didn't know that I was going to be facing a search. And some of the officers recognized some of us and let us through. Some of us let ourselves be searched, thinking, what's going on? So the fact that it was a surprise is in itself a failure of board service communication that we need to address. Thank you.
I would point out that it has been a notice sent out. Ms. Renee referenced that, and it's been in place for 4 months.
It wasn't a post, it was a Twitter post by an officer who has no authority to even do that, and he was making joke of the incident.
So I think, Ms. Renee, thank you.
That's not my point. My point is that I don't recall being at a board meeting where we were apprised that this was going to happen. That's really my point. So I think that is a clear step that ought to have been taken. But to the extent that there were other things that we would want to make sure, because we're going to have significant decisions on matters that are serious that I would like to make sure we think about.
Yeah, I just want to be cautious with crossing the line with operations based on information that I have with my security clearance and with the information I receive nationally and internationally. I don't think that this is a forum for me to come and make those presentations. I can tell you, based on threat assessments, I don't think I have to come to the board every time we make threat assessments and then make operational decisions based on that. I don't think this is a format.
And that's the point I have made, that, you know, this is your responsibility, and you've exercised it, and as you can hear, your colleagues support that. But I think what we're asking is for you to come back, or what I would like to hear you do is come back and let us know what you're doing about information, what you're doing, what the procedures are at the front desk, et cetera, et cetera. Because obviously you heard the comments about, is this done just at a board meeting? Is it done every day? Is it done? So I think it's an information communication rather than an infringement upon operations, Chief Saunders.
That's fine. Thank you.
And moreover, Chair Pringle, the issue is that if this is going to continue in this way, it is a harassment to the public. People are not willing to submit to body searches. It triggers issues for all different people for various reasons, but moreover, it's a breach of the charter, and no police policy supersedes the charter. And if you're going to continue having public meetings, if you really want to call it a public meeting, you cannot hold it in this place where such abuse of powers takes place. There's no reason why that officer should have put his hand on me, but it is a demonstration of what the public faces every day when they interact with the police, and the police want to abuse their powers, thinking they can do whatever to a person's body, disrespecting the dignity and humanity of the person that they're dealing with. And this is why the complaints keep coming forward to this board.
Great. Thank you very much.
It's not something just, thank you very much, sir. It's a serious issue. And I'm raising this as a person whom you know comes here peacefully at all times, as do other members of the public, to really help this board to be what it's claiming that it wants to be, the oversight of the police. The police cannot dictate to the board. The board has a responsibility for its oversight.
Thank you, Dion.
You told me you were going to allow me to speak, and I did, and I had that today.
Well, you have had that.
I spoke a little bit, but I didn't get to speak to the issues.
Well, you did, and thank you very much for that. Again, I apologize for the problems you had today. You've heard the background to it. It will continue. I have asked the chief to come back forward. Ms. Renee, we do, but thank you very much. Thank you. It's not a private meeting, but thank you very much. There are, Dion, thank you. Please step down. Thank you. Colleagues, is there any other business? If not, may I have a motion to adjourn? Yes, Dr. Nuria, for the final time, your motion to adjourn. Seconded, Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you.